Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm your host, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest is Kyle Portbury. Glad to have you with us today, Kyle. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, Peter. Thank you for having me. I finished my cup of coffee already, so all I've got is an empty cup now to hold.
I think
It loses in the background. I love that.
yes, it went translucent.
It did.
I love the backdrop. That's good. That's really good. And
We've got a good art department on this film, which is pretty cool. Like they do some good
incredible.
key art for us. Yeah.
I mean,
This
right
one was
off,
actually up. This one was up on billboards in Times Square earlier in the year, which was pretty incredible
isn't
too.
that mind-blowing?
Right?
Like right off the bat, let me say, when
Mm.
I saw, so there's kind of there's Tell the World and there's the Hopeful,
Yes.
and
Yep.
they're not identical, but they come from a similar source, and we're going to unpack that later. But the
Yes.
very first thing
Yes.
I noticed when I watched Tell the World was how professional it was, and I had this, that classic feeling when you know someone and they're achieving something of what I believe was great significance.
Mm.
I said to the people around me, I know the director of this, and so there was that proud moment, but it was
Yeah.
it was beyond what I expected as far as the quality of the cinematography,
Mm.
and by saying beyond what I expected, it's up there with anything professional on the planet. It compares with all of the other movies out there. And I think it's been a long time coming for
Mm.
the Adventist community to produce a movie. So we're gonna
Uh,
talk a lot about that. But yeah, what are
yeah,
some of your
I
thoughts
think.
about that?
Well, I think there's an interesting. I noticed on a couple of the chat threads, people saying, what's the difference between the two of them? And I guess the most economical way of saying what the difference is, without some of your audience having seen the two of them, is it similar to so Mark Burnett did a series called The Bible back in, I think, the 2010 sometime, 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, which was 10 half-hour episodes, and then later on he released a cinema like epic called Son of God, right? So, in a very similar way, Tell the World was originally a six-part miniseries. People that have seen it on DVD from the church, from ABCs. Those 6 episodes were the top and tail of the episodes got cut off and all put onto one continuous timeline. When it went to YouTube, it was the same. But it's essentially a serialized, long-form telling of the story of how Adventists came to be.
Mm.
At the same time that we shot that, I also shot with the same actors in the same locations, but with a very different angle, a version of that story that was for cinema and was a 90-minute period drama that is structured much like, if you're a cinema buff or a cinephile like I am. I love films from 90s like Princess Bride, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
The Hopeful is structured very similarly to Princess Bride. So I guess,
yeah,
long story short, or short story long, about
yeah,
what the difference is. One was a mini series designed for YouTube. The other is a feature length cinema experience.
yes.
So they
Interesting.
are not the same thing. So whilst some people might go, yeah, but Kyle, I saw the same actor or I saw the same scene. Yeah, but if you look at that scene, it doesn't function in The Hopeful like it functioned in Tell the
Yes,
World. It
yes,
is a very different expression of that, focused on character and what that character wanted. Whereas in Tell the World, what you had was an expression of that, more of a this happened and then that happened. It's like a
yes,
serialized,
yes. Right. Well, I'm
but
glad
both
you've
completely valid, right?
yeah.
There's no, it's not saying that one's more valid than the other. It's just they're different
Different
experiences.
things. Yes, yeah.
The
And I'm
art
going
and craft of cinema is a different experience to a YouTube series. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm glad you've explained it that way, because I've got a question that I'm going to raise later and read an article from a short part of an article where
Mm,
Chester Stanley is interviewed about it, and he raises that difference there. And I think the person, I'll come to it later, but the person was saying, oh, you had some differences with Kyle, the director. And he really put it clearly. No, of course, people are going to have different perspectives. And if he had not agreed with you doing this more movie cinema release version, he would have had the power to kind of maybe squash anything happening. So it demonstrates that he was actually open to you doing, this different version.
Well, no, he's not actually, and he's very not comfortable with there being two versions. But I think the challenge that people arrive at, right, is that just like me back when Tell the World was done, I'm a gun for hire on that show, and the Australian Union Conference owns the IP to that story, so the current Australian Union Conference still own the IP to that story,
right?
And I pitched them a concept of, there is a beautiful expression of this story for a mainstream cinema going audience that has a completely different focus, right? Like it's looking at telling that story in a space where the community goes to wrestle with big ideas and to discuss and to debate and to be provoked, to explore the range of the human experience, right? Like we go to cinema because it's about the only place left now, Peter, where you can sit in a room with 100 to 200 people and experience something at the same time and all walk out and debate and discuss what you just watched. And how do I feel about this now? And there's no wrong or right answer, right? Like that's the beauty of cinema. No one's telling you what to think or how to relate to the characters, or it's up to you. And you get to have that discussion with the people that you went with afterwards. It's a very different
it's really good to know, because
cinema.
It really, in some of these conversations we've been having in the promo, people were saying, oh, it's the same. Oh, no, it's very different. It's chalk and cheese. Chester Stanley says it's the same. Jeff Parker says it's chalk and cheese. I haven't seen it. And you had a pre-release last night for the Adventist, and it shows how out of the loop I am of Adventist network for me not to have known it was on. I would have been there, which would have been a great kind of precursor.
Fortunately, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it releases wide an event, Hoyt's Village, you name it, basically. And in fact, Hoyt's and Event have made it their seniors film of the second half. So when it comes out next Thursday on October 17 in Australia and New Zealand, both those major cinema chains have made it their general seniors at the movies, and Hoyt's have actually made it their mornings at the movies.
Well, that's good. Isn't that incredible?
Which means that you get $1 popcorn and $4 choc tops. So,
and the movie. Well, I'm going to be watching it for sure, and I'm going to encourage everyone today to make sure you put it in your calendar. We'll watch the trailer in a moment, but just one more quick thing about when I watched Tell the World, and I chatted to you. I don't know if you remember or not, but I chatted to you soon
years
after.
ago. Yeah.
And I remember as it came to the end, I suddenly thought, oh, hang on a second. It feels like someone has come in over Kyle's shoulder and said, thanks for taking it this far. We're just going to bring it home now for the last 10 minutes. And was inserted kind of even footage that was not really part of the cinema experience. And it suddenly kind of turned into a little bit of a propaganda piece at the end. And I said to you like, it felt like they kind of took this incredible potential movie and just turned it into a little bit of a propaganda piece. Whereas what I'm getting with The Hopeful is that this is the story you are telling of this movement of people. And there might be things that happen in it that you agree or disagree with, or that I agree or disagree with.
Yeah.
But that's not the point anymore, because you're telling their story. And so we'll come to some of these things that we agree or disagree and people have raised.
Yeah.
But
I think it should be said, Peter, too, that there's no problem with the guys going, thank you very much, Kyle, you got it this far and we'll take it from here. And basically, because that's Tell the World was not my film, right? It was a film that I was hired to direct for the church. And they should be able to get out of it what they want to get out of it, And I think that that's wholly as valid, right, as years down the track, this guy having a different vision and a different
I love it.
passion, and being able to talk to the current administration at the union and go, hey, I think there's a valuable contribution to the larger, even just Christian discourse around
Yeah.
faith and the way that people relate to anticipation and failure and disappointment.
Yeah.
And it was pretty great when you got back, look, Kyle, we don't get it. We don't understand what you're saying, but we get that you get it, you know,
Yeah.
and you seem to know that there's a way forward with this. So, you know,
Yeah.
go and raise the money and God with you. Like, will, you know, you would, you know, from an authorship point of view, I guess what's interesting about this is the recognition of that, you know, authorship of your directing originally on it.
Yes, I think
Yeah. So
I guess
I mean,
what I was
it's
saying when I
beautiful that you can have both,
yeah,
right? I think
and
that's
what I
great.
was saying when I first saw it, I even thought, yeah, of course, that you know, this is their project. Of course, they're allowed to turn it into propaganda. That was never really a concern to me. My
Yes.
thought was,
Yeah.
wow, I knowing Kyle the little bit that I do, I know that he's got another story there that he could, if he had a director's cut, he'd be able to make a very interesting alternative cut of this, which is essentially what the hopeful is. And you
Well,
even
I mean,
said to
it's
me at the time, you said, you
yeah,
know, watch this space. And so I've been waiting
yeah.
these years now for for the hopeful to
I,
come out.
I think what's interesting is it's not actually a director's cut, and
Yeah,
what's
it's
been
a whole different
fascinating,
thing. Yeah,
yeah, and I think it's the beauty of time passing, right? Because when you know when in 2022, which is when we did post production on the hopeful, you know, a lot of years go by, right? That's 8 years since I filmed it.
incredible.
You
Yeah,
know, that bank of footage that's sitting there in a safe, you know, basically gathering dust, you know. And so to pull that out, and my editor and I basically just went, well, why don't we just view this as though it just came off set, you know,
yes,
and just look at it with fresh eyes. And, you know, 10 years down the
yeah,
track, you're more mature as a person, but also, you know, my storytelling has moved past, you know,
yeah.
where it was 10 years ago. So you look at the world very differently because
Well,
you've got different experiences.
I think it's interesting because, and I'm if Jeff Parker's watching, thank you, Jeff,
Mm.
for saying to me that it's chalk and cheese because I hadn't seen it. I'm just going on
Yes.
what people have been saying, and the
Yeah.
people from who were involved with Tell the World who had skin in the game were
Mm.
definitely trying to portray it as, oh, it's just the same. It's just just a different cut with a slightly different ending, and they've got skin in the game for saying that. So to have Jeff Parker go see it and go, actually, it's different. And a couple of people this morning who saw it last night have also said to me, no, it's very different. It's not like a director's cut. It's like it's a retelling of the story, with similar resources and of course setting, and there's going to be similarities because it's based on this group of the hopeful people that start a new
Yeah.
movement. So
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it, and and you know, getting to enjoy it as a separate unit.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've managed
And
I've managed to
what
detangle myself from the two having to be
yeah.
one, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, they
um
most definitely don't. I mean, that's the beauty of art, right? Is that um, you can take a character and you can look at them through one lens. Somebody else can come along and go, actually, what if we just went over here and we looked at that same moment through this lens?
yeah,
You know, and there's a huge thing. You know, unfortunately, you know, my composer Blake, who is also Australian
just
and
about to
is
say,
unfortunately not here. He may be looking along from his
he's probably
deathbed because
watching. Hi, Blake.
yeah, he sent me a text this morning and said I've got the plague from my daughter, which you know is understandable because
Yeah.
children are a petri dish of disease when they, you know. But I did, you know, I did say to him on message that he should harden up and just like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Come on,
steel
Blake.
himself to the come
Come
on,
on,
Blake.
Blake.
I
We'll
mean,
send you the
come
link.
on.
Come on and join us. Just a couple of quick asides there. Blake, uh, I, know each other from doing music a long time
Yes.
ago, and I
Yeah.
have just huge amount of respect for him. A lot of people on this channel have
Yeah.
enjoyed this album, Standing at the Cross, and
He's an incredible
Blake
practitioner.
is
Yeah.
responsible for that sounding so good. He did
Yeah.
all
And
the cello and string arrangements, and
if you go to Spotify, the soundtrack's already available. Spotify,
that's right.
all the
Yeah,
places you stream music, you can go to there and get the
yeah,
Hopeful soundtrack now.
yeah.
And you can, I mean, Blake's incredible. He's working mostly on Marvel and Disney
I know.
movies these days. It's like this is his first full feature score, and I think it's pretty incredible to get. He lives not far away from me,
I
which
know.
is even more incredible. And the
Yeah,
fact that the two of us got to be in each other's space,
yeah,
and work together on bringing that side of the story across. I mean,
yeah.
music's hugely important to
Oh, it
cinema.
conveys emotion, and, like, honestly,
Really, yeah,
with the Standing at the Cross project, it really was just me and a guitar, and then he came
mm,
along and added the other instrumentation later. And
yes,
this is an example of reworking the story. It's
yeah,
like 2 different projects. You listen to the one with
right,
just me and my guitar, and then the one with his beautiful addition of strings and cello and percussion,
yeah,
and of course,
yeah,
some of the other bandmates, of course, added other instruments too. But I don't use this word very often, but I would say Blake is a genius with his music. He's just
mm,
incredible. And so I've listened to the score of The Hopeful, and boy, it's just beautiful. And like you say, just go to
yeah,
Spotify, look up The Hopeful music, and there it is. So Blake, thanks for putting this project together. The music component of Kyle's
I'm
story.
I'm loving this. I'm loving seeing a few of the comments on the side here because I mean, Adventist and cinema, right?
I just want to bring
Such
that
a
one up, actually.
fascinating
Let
relationship.
me just quickly bring this one up that I think you may have just spotted, which I
Uh,
think is funny.
yep,
Before I do, the other little side tangent, I wanted to say, um, was that your little boy Hudson and my daughter
yes,
are the same age, and we're in the same mothers
yep,
group. Just as
yes.
you were about to head off, I think, to the States, right at that time. And of course, your wife Andrea was part of that group, and you've got another little
Yep.
girl now, I think, too, as well.
Yes, Layla, who
Layla, yeah.
is off at a play date. My Hudson
Yeah.
actually is wandering around trying to
And
get my attention
he
from
must
time to
be
time
nearly
because
12 or 12 already.
he is.
Yeah,
He's actually
yeah,
12 on Friday, and he's
'cause
doing that great thing.
isn't
Although
yeah.
I don't know where he's gone now because he was doing that thing where he was pressing the clicker that was setting an
Oh,
alarm off on
yeah,
my phone. I was like,
yeah, yeah,
love it.
yeah,
School
and
holidays in Australia, so those
yeah,
of you joining from other parts of the world, it's
yeah,
yeah,
that's what it is. Yeah,
kids are
and
roaming the neighbourhood looking for things to do at the moment.
yeah, and that particular, mothers group, are still friends to this day, and all of their
Right?
kids were
It's
born in
uncanny.
October,
Yeah.
November. Renee's birthday is
Yes.
October
Yeah.
23, the day after the
Yeah.
Great Disappointment.
So hilariously, and this is quite hilarious. So my daughter's birthday is October 22nd.
You're kidding me?
No, like legitimately October
No.
22nd. Yeah.
And Renee's is the next day? Oh, wow. Okay,
Uh,
back to the story, and this popped up a little earlier, and then I'm gonna play the trailer. This is Alpha Matter. Great to have you watching today. So SDAs are now allowed to go to the theaters. Will their guardian angels go in, or will they be waiting outside the theater?
I'd like to tell you that's why choc tops are so expensive in Australia and New Zealand because there's supply and demand issue with all the angels in the lobby eating them. So it's a real problem that I think needs to be addressed. No, yeah, I love this question because
Yeah.
it came up a lot in the US in April when we released in cinema of people going, but Ellen White said we can't go to the cinema. And I'm like, oh, that's really fascinating because cinema didn't exist until the mid 1920s and she died in 1915. So I'm confused about how you got this
Mm,
message of cinema. And then people will double down and they'll go, oh no,
theater.
but that thing that she said about theaters. And you're like, go back and read that because
Yeah,
what she actually said is attending one specific theater. And she was talking to a specific person about this
yeah.
because that theater was actually somewhere where prostitution was going on. And that person attending was putting themselves in a position where it looked like right
Right.
something that they wouldn't have wanted it to look like. and
Isn't
and
that
I just saw
ironic?
that
Mm,
I just saw that comment there about I think it was Ellen saying that you shouldn't go to movie cinemas. Again, they didn't exist when she was alive.
Yeah.
So this concept that we have created, that Ellen White said cinema is bad, she literally said not one word about movie cinema ever, because they did not exist in her lifetime. So, I love people challenging me with that, because if you believe she said something about it, I'm more worried about your State of the Dead than anything else, because she simply wasn't alive when cinema existed.
Yeah, it's interesting how powerful these and we'll come to urban myths a little bit later, but how powerful they become entrenched in people's minds to the point where they are fact. And that is
Yes.
why my biggest goal with SDAQ&A is not to try and convince someone of my ideas and beliefs, but to simply have the conversation so that exactly what just happened in the last 2 minutes occurs. People say, I'm not happy with this. What do you think about that? Or here's a bit of a joke about this. And you get to talk about it and come away with maybe a new understanding.
I think the goal of any conversation about anything controversial, right? And by controversial, I mean just stuff that people have differing opinions on. I think in 2024, we've almost gotten ourselves collectively, societally, into the bind of I must destroy you and your conversation in order to win the argument. And I think we would all be given a service if we changed that mindset to, wouldn't it be great if the goal wasn't to destroy you or your argument, it was to listen to your perspective, listen to my perspective. And maybe like one thing you say changes slightly the way that I look at my perspective. It doesn't even have to change it, but I might go, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't look at that little aspect quite like that. So now I've shifted slightly in relation to a conversation that you and I are actually in. And the goal, and we don't have to agree, Peter.
No.
We can walk away from that conversation and still be okay with each other. No one feels like they've been destroyed. And life goes on, because that conflict and the wanting to damage other people, I think is, that's a valuable conversation to have in 2024, right? And I think that's going to be one of the things that people find in watching the film. Is that the themes within it of anticipation and despair and disappointment and failure are universal themes, right? Like just because the story through which the characters are experiencing that may or may not be something that is your experience, the emotion and the experience is going to be, because we all anticipate, we all fail at stuff regularly, we're all disappointed, and we all hope for something and long for and want healing for things in our lives. So I think that conversation is really valuable.
I agree. I think so too. I'll just bring up a comment Ray made, and then I want to comment on that myself. Also, he said that his father lost it when his mother took them to see the Disney movie Bambi, and Ray, one night I was just doing some technical stuff, and it was midnight over here, and I had to test some going live, and he just happened to be, I don't know what time it was where he lives, but I invited him on, and we just were chatting while I was doing the tech, and pretty soon we both forgot that we were actually live. And we ended up having it's still on, if people want to go and watch it, on the thread. And Ray has often said, and you'll see it maybe even in some of the comments, is that there's some anger there. And I think that that's okay too. You're totally within your rights to express anger at Adventist.
There's no wrong answer,
whatever.
right?
Yeah. And so,
and I think that's the value of the conversation around cinema, right? Like, I think it's one of the few art forms where no one's going to pop up and tell you what you should think or feel or do as a result of it, right? You walk out of a cinema and you've got your own thought on what you just watched, and you've got your own relationship to it, and you can have a conversation with the people that you went to the film with about that. And I think that audiences are really smart, right? And you have to treat them as such, right? They're an intelligent group of people. And if you try and dumb down or tell them what to think or feel, we're really smart as an audience. We get it straight away, and we're like, that's not the contract of cinema, right? The contract of cinema is, this is my adventure, right? I came in here, I want to sit down and I want to experience emotions and a story. And then I want to choose what I do with that at the end. And I think that that's the beauty of, you don't have to be Adventist or really like Adventism to enjoy the hopeful, right? Because what you're going to discover in there is an adventure that you get to go on and walk out thinking and feeling anything you like at the end of it. Like there is no wrong answer to that. You can walk out and be like, oh, I really hate that Ellen White character. Great. But that's not a wrong answer. You're allowed to do that.
You're allowed to do that, yeah. And people can
that
speculate.
conversation is, yes.
And people can speculate, like Alpha Matter. I'll just bring another. You can speculate that Ellen White probably would not have liked cinemas if she'd had a chance to see them. She talked negatively about card games, sports, bicycles, airplanes. Why wouldn't she think this is acceptable?
Yeah.
And they show R-rated movies in the cinemas today, and you could well be right. But here we are having a conversation about that, which I think's.
But you might also be wrong, because I may not think that, right? And just because that's your experience with life doesn't mean it's mine. And I think it's okay to not all agree on the same thing, right? Somebody just wrote, "Is the movie R-rated?" No. It's actually been rated PG by the Australian Film Commission. So,
just talking about that, someone said to me, and I don't know if it's just a rumor, but that the leading actress had been involved with some kind of OnlyFans or pornographic stuff. Is that true, or is that just a gossip?
No, I mean, that's again, right? People look at roles in film and they go, "Oh, there's sex in that movie, and she's in that film, or she's involved in that act within that piece of cinema." This is a professional actor, right? This is not, and someone will go, "Well, why didn't you hire Adventists to work on the film?" You point me to the Adventist institution of the performing arts and I'll hire an Adventist.
Yeah.
Right. And also that Adventist has got to be in the location where I'm filming, because it's not economically possible to pull someone from the far reaches of the globe and pay them and accommodate them and do all that stuff. Right. So it's just the practical realities of telling a story. You've got the cast that you have available to you in the market where you're able to film.
Yeah.
And I'll defend, because somebody asked me, would you, knowing what you know about the actress's lifestyle post you working with her, would you cast her again? And I said, no, but not for the reason you think, because I've been absolutely horrified by the deplorable behavior of Adventists towards that person.
So judgmental.
So I wouldn't cast her again for her sake, not for yours, right? Because I still to this day will defend that she was the casting that should have been for that role, right?
She was great.
Down to little things like, in rehearsals one day, we were talking about conspiracy theories around Ellen, right? Which is always great fodder. The internet's full of it. And I was like, oh no, because she was saying, oh yeah, I came across this thing about Ellen White had grand mal seizures. And I was like, oh great, here we go. I don't know anything about this. I'm just a filmmaker, right? I'm not a theologian. I'm not a student of Adventism in that way, right? But I know enough about it and have researched obviously heavily in this area to tell this story, but was floored by the fact that before I could say anything, she said, well, I know she didn't have grand mal seizures. And I was like, how would you possibly be able to know that? And she said, well, my mother died of them when I was 13. I know exactly what a grand mal seizure looks like. I know its effect on people. She said, I don't know what was happening to her. I'm open to whatever, but I can tell you for 100% certainty from personal experience, she did not have those. I mean, what are the chances that your lead actor
she'd had that experience,
has that experience in her life, right? And then was able to bring that life experience of her own loss, right, as a 13-year-old to there. And, I think when we close our minds down to people are people, right? They're not this idea you have of how life should be in the perfect world.
Well, I think so judgmental. Like you had to judge. Okay, so that means that pretty much 50% of pastors shouldn't be allowed to to share the
Yeah.
gospel on the pulpit
Honestly,
every
none
week,
of us
because
should be allowed to do
what did
anything if we're
Jesus
going to
say
follow the
about
Bible.
he who is sinless or blameless cast the first stone.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of casting stones at her, but I agree with you. I think she was right for the job and did a
yeah,
fantastic job. And even just the little quirky things there about having this conversation, it was never
yes,
leveled at Ellen White that she had grand mal seizures. It was leveled that she had a version of that with some kind of narcoleptic stuff,
right.
where
Well, there you
there
go.
are
Yeah, there you
people
go.
that have
Yeah,
vision type seizures,
yeah.
and they have all the symptoms that she had, and people have done research in that. But
Yeah.
what a good opportunity to even get to say that, to help to dispel myths and
What a
things.
great, why not be able for that to be able to
Hey,
be a
Hudson.
conversation? Yeah, you can see Hudson's poking in. He's like, say hello.
Hey, Hudson. You probably don't remember me, but I remember when you were before you were
No,
even
he's there.
one.
Yeah, yeah. And I
So
think that conversation should be okay, right? Like
yeah,
but we shouldn't be having it so that we can beat down someone that
exactly.
did with that
Yeah,
opinion,
yeah.
right? Like I think a mature movement and a mature faith should be able to weather
I,
the conversation in a manner that's like productive, right? Like it shouldn't be we shouldn't have a feeling that if we even entertain this conversation, that's the end of us, right?
yeah. Why do you think? And this really came to my mind last night. Again, on the promo thread
Mm.
somewhere, someone was saying to me, "Oh, you're obsessed with this topic of Ellen White, and you're trying to just get everyone to call her a false
Uh,
prophet." Why is it, do you think? And look, since 1983, I've been performing music out in the world. I've been playing, for 30 years, the new age circuit. The Outback Hippies have
mm,
been playing the festival and the rock and roll circuit. I've been doing praise and worship music for the Adventist church. I also began in the early 80s to play for all the different denominations. So I've got a good feel of what the kind of culture is of many cultures. And I've
yes,
noticed that Adventists have a higher than usual um, uh, ability to be thrown by any difficult questions. They instantly go into ad hominem attack. Oh, you're just being obsessive. Or you're obsessive. Or you've got an axe to grind. Or you're just angry or bitter. Oh, this is what you're doing. But they're not very good at just rebutting the claim that they've had leveled against them and talking about it. Why my claim is that Adventists have an extra high level of being easily, I don't want to use the word triggered, but that's what I would have used in the past.
mm,
Um, why do you think that is? Because you too have been in the secular world and the Christian realm and the Adventist realm. Why do Adventists have this particular inability to just discuss these topics? Conservatives and liberals, all the sides of them, have real trouble just debating calmly the topics like we're chatting about today. Why do you think that is from your perspective?
well, again, this is only going to be my perspective
Yeah.
on it, right? But my take as a lifelong Adventist is I don't know that we helped ourselves out culturally by being a peculiar people set aside for a peculiar time, right? I think that mindset has shifted us into a them and us mentality about the rest of humanity, right? Like it's them and us. And when you do that, you become defensive of us, right? Because there's almost like a lack of, one of the big things I've seen taking the film out to market around the world this year is that either people don't know anything about Adventists and have no clue that they even exist, or if they do, their understanding is minimal at best, right?
Mm.
So if you're not Adventist or Adventist adjacent, you're like, oh, what are you guys, like an offshoot of Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses? Or which is interesting why they say that actually
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Those 3.
Um, and it's largely it's a visual problem because what happened in the 70s and 80s. So there was an artist, Harry Anderson, who did all of the Adventist art.
Yes.
Um, and classically, we didn't pay him well enough, but also we weren't savvy enough to wrap up his artwork in IP protection. And so he went and then contracted for the Mormons. So if you go
Mhm.
into the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, There's a huge, big Christ descending, from the heavens with angels and stuff around him. That's in the Mormon tape that was painted by an Adventist.
Yeah.
And Mormons got really upset when a couple of Deadpool movies ago they ripped that off, right? With Deadpool coming down like that. And it's fascinating that like that art visually branded, and then also he worked for the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so there's his artwork within Watchtower still to this day. So from a visual literacy point of view,
that's a very good
right,
point.
We branded ourselves as one and the same. And so in many ways, that kind of not really putting ourselves out there and allowing that conversation to flourish and being quite protective of it, I think has created almost a sense of defensiveness, for want of a better word. And it makes it hard. It makes it hard for a conversation, like we're having right now, Pete. Like easy, and we don't have to agree.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to be like precious and angry and like, oh, if you don't say, yes, Kyle, I agree with you, then I'm like, screw you. I'm out,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Like I don't know. I mustn't have been given that gene, and maybe because we traveled around so much, I never really picked up on the cultural norms of any particular country we were in. And so if people were trying to pull me into line or whatever, call Poppy, it just went over my head. And I just didn't get it. And so I don't get to this day why people just can't have a conversation like this. The guy that was saying I was obsessed, I call him Vanishing Vernon, because he'll come in, he has these big little ad hominem attacks, and then says I wasn't attacking, and then I say, well, look, come on the show and let's talk about it so people could see that we're friends, and we can actually you'll have a better understanding of why you think the way you do. And none of them do. It's so difficult to have people like there's nearly 300 interviews, so I've got no problem having interviews, 2 or 3 a week. But this particular group of people that love to be critical on the sidelines without being willing to come on and speak up, I just think that they are very weak-willed, and it demonstrates, I think, exactly what you said. You raised a good point. The church has been raised in a very insular us and them mentality. We are the remnant and the world is evil, and just
which
the
is
very
actually
nature.
really,
Sorry,
it's
go ahead.
useful. That philosophy is useful sometimes, right? But on balance, is it useful?
Not
for
when
a totality of time. I don't. Again, I'd just be like subjective in my opinion on that. But I do think it's really healthy to be okay with the differing of opinion, right? And for it's an age thing too, right? I think the older I've gotten, the more comfortable I've been with not knowing everything. And in fact, coming into my mid-40s now, I'm actually really enjoying that I don't know most things, because the curiosity of life that then affords you, you're able to look at the world through an eye of curiousness. I want to follow that rabbit hole down there and explore that concept or that idea, and let that challenge my fundamental basis for living in the way that my values and morals. And
I think it is an age thing, but only if you are a curious-minded person, and only I've discovered if you are willing to put your creative endeavors into the public sphere, and you've done that. Because when you do that, you suddenly realize that you'll have people that love you and people that hate you at the same time. And that gives you a strength.
Great.
That gives you a strength and a wisdom that you would not have otherwise gained. I know many people that are 40 plus that no matter how many years they're going to get, they're never going to gain that sense of, it's okay to have a differing viewpoint. So I've found the path to mental health and letting go of depression and anxiety is putting yourself in the very hot seat. Release your creative endeavors, everyone. You've heard it from me here, and allow everyone to love you and hate you at the same time. And you will find out who you really are. And when you know who you really are, your authentic self, all of that anxiety and depression floats away. Now,
I'd just like to point out, so Jimmy James up there has asked a question a couple of times on there. I mean, I'm not a theologian, so any comment I would have on that.
Is this the one
I
about
mean,
propagating the different Jesus?
well, no, I think it's the gospel isn't different. It's solid and immovable. I mean, yes and no, and everything else in between, right? Like, I think if you look at that work, that body of work that is the Gospels, as an immovable object, I mean, it's a living, breathing document, isn't it? You know that, and again, only my opinion. You know, so if it ceases to be movable and it becomes static,
I think,
I mean, and that's not to say that the concepts in there may or may not be immovable. It's just that it's 2024 right now. It's not 2,000 years ago. So the construct with which I'm arriving at that, you know, and also I don't, you know, yes, maybe different Jesus, but also maybe not, right? Because again, I didn't live 2,000 years ago, so I can only look at what I'm looking at from a gospel standpoint through the lens of a guy that lives in the 19th and 20th century, you know.
yeah,
That's all I've got. I don't have the ability to look at it. So it has to be movable, because if it's immovable, there's no room for anybody outside of the time when it was written. That's my 2 cents. And you can disagree, and that's totally fine.
And what I've discovered since leaving the church is that Jimmy is right in the sense that from the outside perspective, you suddenly do see that the Adventist gospel.
I would just comment on there,
Yeah.
though, that Jimmy saying, so you propagate a different Jesus and a different gospel. That's not what I said. And I think
No.
it's useful to, like, you know, don't misquote people out of what I said.
And I think he's saying that
Yeah.
Adventists, particularly, because I don't think he's seen the new movie, but he's possibly presenting his thoughts on the Tell the World, where some would say that there's a bit of propaganda at the end of it. And when you leave the church and look at some of this from an objective perspective, you note that this movement that grew out of 1844 genuinely thought they were having an additional component to the gospel, and as long as
I love
Jesus
Pete.
doesn't,
I just want to comment to Jimmy. I
yeah,
love your line of questioning and your perseverance with it. Like, the gotcha questions, though, aren't part of a great conversation, right? Like,
no,
what they do is they actually put everybody at a, ooh, now we've got to be defensive, right?
polarizing, yeah.
And they polarize, and that's great for social media, and it's great for the algorithm working on, like, the anxiety and the fear and the anger driving, right? But if you actually truly want to talk to people, you know, understand their perspective and take a little bit of time, and don't go, great, I've got a soundbite now that I can go and post on my social media and use as a, look, the guy's like whatever he is, like,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, you know, like, we're adults, right? Like, have a conversation, and it doesn't have to be, look, I got you in a technicality of wording.
Well, there's no gotcha with what you were saying, because you were clearly saying that you're looking at through the lens of your upbringing, through the lens of, you know, this particular
so
century that
so
you've been
I
raised in.
love this, and I'm not going to comment
I
again,
can't even
mate,
see the
because,
conversation. I turned it
yeah,
off.
I love it. Yeah.
But we'll come back to Jimmy in a moment. But yeah, my thought on that is
But I
that
love it, Jimmy. Like, what, you know, it's all good, and I don't feel offended by it. Like, my challenge to you would be just stop and go, why am I wanting to push it, right? That would be my challenge to you.
yeah, and again, like we said at the start, you're telling a story that is already encapsulated in a historical position and narrative,
Mm.
and you're retelling it from another perspective. He's obviously right. I'm not looking at
I
the
love it.
comments.
I love it.
Ignore them for a minute. But we'll come back to that if you want. But I've been promising that we'll show the trailer. But yeah, so the former Adventist can have a perspective, which I think, Jimmy, if you stop trying to beat up Kyle there, you also will learn something that it's good.
Peter. It's why I've got a broken heart and a safety pin on my shirt,
So you can knit the two together.
so I can knit the two back together.
And I can see what Jimmy's saying now that I've left the church, because I can see that the 1844 to present Adventist gospel has seen itself as having, like, the atonement happened at the cross, but it's not a completed work. And so the addition to the gospel that they do add, like, quite clearly, is one that you can perceive as being, unless the Lord comes back really soon, there's going to be a time period where this special last time message for the world with a tweak and twist on the gospel is not going to be relevant. But that's just another perspective to put on the table for people to consider. And if he wasn't,
honestly,
if he wasn't attacking, he'd be able to say, maybe you and he can have a conversation about it, and you might go away and go, oh, okay, I can see how Adventism has got a different gospel. But if someone's going to kind of attack you, you're not going to go there.
To me, though, Peter, like, as a filmmaker, I mean, this is the whole point of, there's a conversation raging, right? Which is the whole point of art.
Yeah. Yeah.
To rage a conversation. So, like, it's fabulous to me. Like, I love watching, like, a list of things popping up, because
incredible platform,
so much fun.
SDAQ&A, because it's one of the only platforms in the world that literally allows. I love when I see Jimmy popping up. I go, awesome. When Ray's there, awesome. When Gospel Adventist's there, awesome. Because here we are having this dialogue that's robust and diverse. And at the end of the day, I'd sit at a cafe with Jimmy and Ray and you, and have a great lunch together.
Uncomfortable conversations are the spice of life, right? Like, it should make you and provoke you and challenge you, right? Like, if we all just sat here and it was all platitudes, right? No one was challenging you on stuff, it'd be a bit of a boring conversation, right?
Yeah, so I love it. And we're demonstrating in real time. I'm a pig in mud right now. I love it. And the fact that when Tell the World came out, the fact that I was able to message you and say, loved it, like, world-class acting, movie, cinematography. What happened in the last 10 minutes? Because I felt comfortable saying that to you, I learned something. I went away, oh, I see now, right. This is more of a series put together. And you put out that little bit of a carrot there, watch this space. And I thought, good, one day he's going to kind of do his own little version. And here we are right now promoting that version is available.
Yeah.
So let's watch the trailer, and then we'll come back for more of this conversation. How do I do that again? I think this is the right one. And
words that have softened thousands of others' lives.
I beg you, do not put this burden upon my shoulders. Send someone else.
You must tell others, William.
Lucy, I'm a gentleman farmer. I shall soon be 50. I am too old to take on such a challenge.
Well, it's your choice. Are you the rock, or are you the plow?
Yes, it's not the first time the end of the world has been prophesied by a fool, nor will it be the last. If you do not renounce these radical ideas, you will not be welcome here in this house of worship.
I cannot mind my child and travel. I shall continue.
I really believe this doctrine which you preach. I was lost, and now I'm found. Greetings, friends!
We must follow the word of God over the rule of men. We feel love. It lifts us up. It carries us forward. And it will guide us home.
I was made for you.
Yeah, Powerful. And boy, noticing the music again there in watching that trailer, Blake Robinson, what a fantastic job.
And Jonas, who does the original, there's 2 original songs in the film. And if you've ever sung like 10,000 Reasons or Cornerstone, Jonas wrote both of those with Matt Redman.
Oh,
He
really?
regularly writes for Andrea Bocelli, Celine Dion, Barbara Streisand, works with Lauren Daigle all the time. So, I mean, just having a creative expression collaboration like him and Blake, music's so evocative and emotive, right?
Yeah.
So, when you're creating the roller coaster ride that is cinema for an audience, so that they go in, and they're both surprised yet find that there's inevitabilities in that story nonetheless, right? And the inevitabilities are again, it's those universals, right? Like we all love and we all lose and we all anticipate stuff and we're all disappointed when that doesn't pan out the way we hoped it did. I think that, when you're able to work with people like that who are so good at what they do and they're able to like challenge you and to think differently about the story. And so, what they've brought to the table changes what you then bring to the table next time. In that ongoing process that is post-production, you end up getting something that obviously like is creating a lot of great provoking conversation.
I love it.
Which is the whole point, right? Like,
that's
the point. It should be like, let's discuss anything and everything. I think that's fantastic.
So I'm talking with Kyle Portbury, the director of The Hopeful and Tell the World, and I just want to quickly share the website. Just does that come up on the screen? Where people can actually go and it's www. I hate saying that. thehopefulmovie.com. thehopefulmovie.com.
And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's .com.au. And so you'll be able to. So that's the international site. So if you're outside of Australia and New Zealand right now, you'll be able to watch it streaming. Just go there and click watch at home. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, it's exclusively in cinemas from October 17th. In
so that's
Hoyt's
next
Event Cinemas,
that's next
Village,
Thursday our time,
next
isn't
Thursday.
it? It'll be on Glendale next week.
Yep, sure will.
Okay, I'm going next Thursday. Oh, hang on. I think I'll be in Sydney.
And
So I'll go next Thursday, but
60,
I'll be in Sydney.
Are you over 60 yet, Peter?
I am, yeah. So I might get a
good
seniors discount.
You will, because Event and Hoyts have made it their seniors film for the second half of October. So you will get seniors at the movies at both chains.
Well, I'll be in Sydney next Thursday, and I will. By the way, I need to just give everyone a note. There won't be a program next Wednesday night Pacific time or Thursday during the day. I will be in Sydney, and I will go and watch it there. There's a cinema on George Street.
Yes.
I will watch it Thursday night. So if anyone is in Sydney and wants to join me, let me know. Now, I liked in Tell the World, and I'm not sure if you pursued the theme in The Hopeful. There was a big section on William Miller. Now, William Miller was a Freemason. Did you research that or include that in the movie at all in The Hopeful? Now, he did leave Freemasonry in 1831.
Yes,
because he felt that that it may not be in alignment with and put the general Christian body offside. And I'm not a conspiratorialist.
Conspiratorialist?
Is that the right word? I'm so not one, I don't even know how to say it.
Yes.
I don't have the same vengeful dislike for Freemasons that a lot of people do. I think, they're largely misunderstood. The secrets aren't about deep, dark mysteries. They're just about, can you keep a secret? And if you can, then you are a virtuous.
Well, Peter, that's because you're only at the 30th degree. Like once you get up to where I am at 33,
right? Then
it really gets interesting. It really gets interesting.
Yes. No, once you combine the 33rd degree with your Jesuit order status.
Yes, my Jesuit order. Yes, that's right. It gets really fascinating.
But as a historical thing, though, had you researched it? Did you include it in The Hopeful? I don't remember it being in Tell the World.
Yeah, I mean, only to the extent that I guess once you're aware of it and it's in there, I think what it does is it frames why it's quite fascinating that when he moves to, because he didn't actually go to the Bible until the end of that period of time, right? Like, he was very well read and had a really vast library that had authors like Voltaire and Isaac Newton and all, which is rare for this period of time for a farmer to have that level of education. So, and it's because of his Freemason background and his deism, essentially, at that period of time, that gives him that. I guess that there's something interesting about a guy who's like, almost like, well, I've only got one more thing in the library to check off, right, in my search for why I didn't die in this event in the War of 1812. And so I think for me that's interesting, right? Like that you get to the I'm going to cross this off the list, and then you stop and you can't cross it off the list. And again, whatever you think about that, I think that that's fun, right? Like, that's great fodder for character, like, development and looking at someone and why they may have looked at something a certain way or why they missed something, right? I also don't think we appreciate failure to the extent that we should. Like, I think failure gets a bad rap generally, and actually it's really valuable to us. Like, failure is the thing that drives us forward to the next discovery.
Yeah.
And if we discount the value of failure in a journey, it's why failure is why we arrive at where we arrive, right? It's actually the secret source of success. And so if we shy away from wanting to fail, and we're too afraid to look stupid in front of other people, then we won't discover and find the things that actually mean something in life. Those big discoveries always happen out of a like, oh, how did we get to this point? Like, where I thought I was going to be this and it's not, and now what? I think is fantastic. Yeah.
Very important. And I think if you're going to be judgmental of William Miller's past, you're entering into the same ground if you're being judgmental of your lead actress there, by saying that people, because of where they've come from, therefore they're never allowed to contribute anything of value. None of us would do anything if that were the case. Right? None.
And if you were afraid of challenging questions or people going, look at what they said over here about this, again, you would never do anything. I think the beauty of being able to set a story in front of an audience is that you just have to be like, well, it's okay for people not to like it. It's okay for people not to like me. It's okay for people not to like the cast, right? It's also okay for people to love me. It's also okay for people to love the cast. It's also okay for people to love the film. It's also okay. I would actually rather, Peter, that people love it or hate it, because if it's just like, it was fine. Like, stab me in the heart as an artist, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's, this, right? Like, the worst compliment you can get paid is, that was okay. You're like, why did I go through all of that roller coaster of like life emotion for the last couple of years for someone to be like, that was fine.
Yeah.
The choc top was a little bit melted by the time I ate it. Just like the movie, right? Like, that would kill me more than someone like going,
when
I hated everything that you did with it. I dislike your take on life. You're a terrible human being, Kyle. I'd be like, great, job done.
Yeah. It's good you're having a visceral reaction.
Yes. And that is the point of story, right? Is to elicit, it's to provoke an audience into conversation. And if you're not doing that, then dare I say you're not doing, somebody said to me the other day, don't go watch Joker 2 in the cinema. Folie à Deux, I think is the second one. And I was like, why? And I said, terrible film. And I went, right, well, I probably need to go and watch that now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because maybe it is terrible. Maybe it's not. Who knows? It's the same. Francis Ford Coppola just put out Megalopolis. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Right. Yeah.
I think. which again, really polarizing. Some people are like, it's amazing. If you don't like it, you don't understand cinema. It's similar to, I went to a comedy club in New York last week, and, really late at night, 11 o'clock at night. And several of the comedians came out, and when their jokes weren't landing with the audience, were like, well, that joke's amazing. You guys obviously just don't get it. I was sitting there chuckling to myself going, I mean, if I don't get it, that means it's not amazing, kind of, doesn't it? Right? Like you can't blame an audience for not getting what you intended.
Exactly.
Right. You just have to go, oh, like this particular audience in this particular venue on this particular evening doesn't find me funny. Huh. Well, I should probably try something different and try and make like, what can I do to make them laugh? What can I do to connect? So, I think blaming, it's always easy to blame the audience when you don't like the response.
Oh, yeah. Blaming the tools, blaming the audience.
And we're all guilty of that. Somebody said that in the comments, like, oh, Kyle just got triggered. I'm like, yeah, probably, like for a moment, but so what? Right? Being triggered and letting stuff affect you is the whole point.
Exactly.
And if we're unwilling to allow things to affect us and to work through that conversation and keep talking, we're never actually going to get into anything interesting, right? We're never going to get to the real, like, the heart and graft of like why I feel the way I do, or why I think what I do, or maybe I'll change the way that I think because of whatever it is, So
there's a lot of thought processing that goes on after these kind of conversations as well. So they're brilliant on any level, because it's all about essentially observing, pondering, looking at claims, hearing other people's perspectives, but ultimately to use your own brain to draw your own conclusions. And healthy people are able to have the conversation, sure, get upset, not get upset, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then later on, as the boat's moved on, the wake's still there, you sit in that and you ponder it.
I like that you used the boat, the wake.
Yes, the boat in the background, the wake of that. You can sit in that and you ponder it still while it's still fresh, and you almost guaranteed to learn something and to grow. And
Clancy Rogers, thanks for joining the conversation.
Oh yes, I noticed she was watching.
I saw her at Glendale Cinema last night.
Yeah.
Interesting question that you asked about, was it hard to discard or choose different scenes? No, actually. In fact, it was probably the most.
What did she ask?
She said, was it hard to discard or choose different scenes in this telling of the story that is the hopeful?
Because you were saying earlier that you had in the Tell the World, you sometimes at the exact time you'd reshoot some scenes, potentially knowing that they might be used later on. So you would have had a lot of material there to keep or discard. So sorry, back to answering Clancy.
Well, I think what's interesting about that question is, here's to give a bit of insight into how different it actually is to Tell the World. The Hopeful's 90 minutes long. 50 of it only exists in the Hopeful. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Wow.
Right? None of the, there's the whole storyline structure of Andrew with his kids on the ship going to Switzerland that only exists in the Hopeful. And that was a very deliberate choice to tell a story structurally a little bit differently, right? Like its goal and aim is to give the audience a bit of a release of, like, if something happens in the film, well, what does that mean? You've got the ability and the device of popping back into the ship and one of the kids going, this doesn't make any sense at all, right? Like, those are really fun things to play with cinematically, where you can play around with different ways of structuring narrative and how do you tell that story. I really like Princess Bride, so it's very structurally similar to a film, that's one of my favorites. Peter Falk and Kevin Savage classically are, he's telling his grandson who's pretending to be homesick the story of the Princess Bride, and it's a particularly useful device when you've got a sweeping narrative that goes in all of these different directions, right? You need the grounding of a stable environment to come back to, dare I say, so that you can re-navigate, steer the ship in another direction when you need to. And that ship was, it's fascinating because that ship's a real ship, right? There's only one of them left that's a 2-stack steamer from this era in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's still above water. So, we were pretty fortunate. Yeah, we were pretty fortunate. It sails out of Glasgow, and it's diesel now. So the smokestacks don't have,
the steam.
They don't have anything bellowing out of them from burning coal. So all of that was put in, a fabulous team in the US. That
add that later.
Stacks, yeah. Really difficult. I didn't realize actually how challenging that was, because the team that shot the aerials for HBO Succession did the aerials for the ship, which we shot in 2022 actually. So the ship, all of the exterior of the ship was shot fairly recently, and you're tracking. You've got a heavy lift drone that's carrying a cinema camera. There's a follow boat that is launching that camera with operators and stuff on it.
Wow.
When you get back to post-production, there's no track points for the VFX team to track to, right? It's literally a ship on water, and water throws out the programs because it has all these peaks and troughs and little points that pull the tracking software out of whack. So, the first couple of times you watch when they're starting to do renders of it out of the particle render for the smoke, all of a sudden the ship will turn and the smoke will start going in a different direction. So then you get 2 smoke, with nothing attached to them, going off in the opposite direction. It was really fun watching them work out that process, and they're all hugely, talented practitioners. My VFX team are all Disney and Pixar guys, so really, really good at it. And just watching them work through that process and work out how to make it work was really, really fun.
I love that stuff. I love all that technical stuff.
So good.
I won't, because people will glaze over, but I'm wanting to talk. What cameras did you use?
So
what post-production voiceover techniques did you use? This kind of thing.
Arri Alexa M pluses, Peter, full frame. Arri's big, and in fact, those cameras had just come off the RoboCop remake. So the exact same camera bodies we got from RoboCop, and they came over, and it was using a lens package that really, old crusty, if you know anything about cinema lenses, the Hawk C series lenses, which have been used on some really fabulous old films that I know and love really well, but I won't bore you with the details.
I noticed that was one of the first things I noticed in Tell the World as I'm sitting there, and I thought, wow, the lenses on this are incredible. The depth of field is amazing. And, for that alone, I think people should go and watch it. I want to just talk a little bit.
And cinematically, right? When you translate, so what you're seeing on YouTube or DVD is not the experience of going in and seeing it in cinema, right? That you're blowing up an image, and also, so Tell the World was not shot in the same aspect ratio as The Hopeful. The Hopeful was shot in what's called 2:3:9, so it's cinema scope.
Nice.
Really big wide, which is why when you go to the cinema, it looks like a movie, right? Because it's shot in the same aspect ratio as all the old Western movies were shot. And so that,
can't wait.
That side of it. And then, I was lucky enough, I worked with a colorist who basically brings that raw material to life in post. Hudson Greening, because he got to, I would never dare to touch this guy's color grade rig, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars of control surfaces. You're sitting in a big cinema, it's the same place Baz Luhrmann color graded Elvis with the same guy that color graded Elvis.
Wow. And you can see it changing in real time, where he's actually saying, how about this or that?
And Hudson, I'll put him on so that you can see his reaction.
Hey,
Hudson, I go to the bathroom when he came down one day when we were doing the color grade, and I come back and he's sitting there working the tools, which I would never even dare to touch. Right?
And he's letting Hudson have a go. I love it.
And Hudson's in there, he's turning characters into the Incredible Hulk by making their skin tones green, and I'm just like, goodness me.
Incredible.
But that's the beauty, right? That's I mean, there's something beautiful about the curiosity of children, right? Like, and trying to rediscover that as an adult, I think, is really valuable because it allows you to play and to be able to just investigate and change your opinion on things. And I love it. There's a couple of people going, I'm really sorry, I've got to go, I've got something else on. I'm like, we've moved off the topic of controversy.
Like I said, as soon as you start talking technical stuff, that's all right. And one quick technical question. A lot of movies, people don't realize that the voices are added again later, and some movie, none of the sound effects, the car driving, the walking of feet, the birds in the air, are actually the boom mic on location. Some are, sometimes it's integrated, sometimes it's completely redone. How much of the original sound source did you use in any given scene?
So for dialogue, one of the things I'm really particular about on set is, like, I treat the location sound for performance like I treat the visual, because you can't ever recreate that moment in ADR outside of it. Like, you can get close to it, but I really like to get it on location.
So you make sure you use a really good mic closely. Right.
What was great about that is there's quite a lot of ADR in Tell the World. Actually, they replaced dialogue quite a lot. There's zero replacement in The Hopeful. It's
really, so that would have placed extra work on you to make sure that every new scene location kept a similar kind of audio quality, because
you can build everything else, right? Like all of the Foley, what they call Foley in effects. So like a horse and cow, all of that's replaced, right? Because you can't get that clean. There's not enough boom operators and sound recorders to place in all those places. And again, there's guys that that do this for a living for like really big movies that in Sydney and do a fantastic depth of sound world for you, so that you don't ever get pulled out of the story because a cup gets, because in normal life, like a cup gets placed on the table, there's a sound associated with it, right? And so it's just layering in all of that detail so that in your Dolby Atmos 27 speaker setup, in the cinema, you're getting that full bandwidth of experience of being immersed in a world, and that to me is really it gives you a beautiful opportunity to stay in a story, right? And
keeping the dialogue the same if you're just using an outdoor mic would have been really hard.
Well, you just have to, you just go. I always check with Dylan, my sound recordist, like, how is that for sound, because I'm going to use this. So if there's a problem, you'd better tell me now.
Tone,
we'll
volume,
do another take for sound.
Stuff leaking in,
Anyway, which isn't to say we don't steal a word or a phrase from another take and put it in, but it's all still location sound, right?
Yeah, that's incredible.
And it put a bit of a burden on us in post-production, in the sense that there was no backup of like, it has to be able to work. There's a scene where Ellen and James are having an argument and there's a baby crying in it, and that baby cried every single take. And it cried over the top of dialogue, and my sound team were incredible because they were able to cut around that with the location sound. And make it work in a way that you would just not even notice,
even realize. Right? I love that.
You would have no clue, and that's that's the art and craft of
I could do a whole show just chatting technical stuff with you, but we won't. Now, Mike Dye writes about 100 at Event Cinema last night in Maroochydore. I think Glendale was a couple of hundred people. So I'm chatting today with Kyle Portbury, who has released the movie The Hopeful, and it's in cinemas officially next week, Thursday, October 17 here in
October 17.
Australia.
Yeah.
It has been released already in the States, and people can go to thehopefulmovie.com.au over here, or in the States, thehopefulmovie.com, and find out where its screenings are, etc. I want to jump to the Spectrum article. I think I can bring it up on the screen. I'll try.
I love you going deep dive history.
Oh, mate. This is has that come onto the screen?
Yes.
So
all right, ask all the tough questions, Pete.
this is some tough questions, comments.
I've
so
shifted
this is
position. I'm ready for
shifted
it.
position. Here we go. So Chester Stanley, I guess, was the original visionary for the Tell the World project. In this article, he talks about the process. They ask him lots of questions. I love Spectrum magazine. I mean, there's people who do and don't, and there's people who have there's people who have good reason in many ways for not liking some things that have happened. But overall, I think it's just a brilliant conversation starter. Now, so have I got the right place here? I just wanted to talk about where they asked him. So just before that, some people, when I announced that you were the director of the movie, Tell the World and The Hopeful, people were saying, oh, no, I thought Chester Stanley was. Well, he's an executive producer, and that's different to being the director. So I just want to clarify that to those who might be confused. And this article from way back is Spectrum, and they were just chatting to Chester about the vision of it all, how he kind of got the ball rolling. I think he's a good team player, and he pulled together a great team, and essentially none of this would have happened if it wasn't for him. And I even liked his answer to this question. I believe that the production team and the director, Kyle Portbury, disagreed about some aspects of the film. What were the disagreements and how were they resolved? And he answers, Kyle and I have always been good friends, and we worked well together in the development of Tell the World. He was out here in Australia recently, and we talked on the phone at some length. I think that Kyle did an outstanding job directing Tell the World. He always expressed appreciation that we put our trust in him as the director. The actors really appreciated him. And then this is the part where I had thought it's probably the same thing, just a director's cut. And now I'm glad we've chatted about it, because I know it's not. But he seems to actually, it's not that long ago, this interview. But in terms of
I think it was 2016, maybe. I think.
Well, he's talking about the two cuts, though. Anyway,
I think what he was referring to was, at the time that we did, so there was a different, they essentially, like, I presented what Tell the World could look like in its 6-episode form.
Yes, okay.
And they went in a different direction to that, which again, totally fine. Like that's
they're paying the bills, and it's their
they're paying the bills.
Yeah,
you're hired, and I think it's really important to acknowledge the visionary role of leaders, right? Like in wanting to tell a story and re-identify and just connect Adventists, no matter where they are on that journey, right? With that identity, and I think that's hugely valuable to just Adventism in general, that we have those visionary leaders who are able to go, hey, we want to tell stories in a very different manner than we potentially have before. And we want to move out of just telling stories in the literary form, which is, again, safe space for Adventists, right? We get in Adventism what stories written look like. Books and literature easy sell for us.
Yeah.
I think when you get into art and cinema, that's a dangerous place, right? It's not comfortable for Adventists, as you can see on the chat thread beside us there, right? Like it's controversial, and I think it's fabulous that you've got, and we've had leaders in the past and currently who are able to see different ways. I think he would, I know he fundamentally disagrees that the hopeful should exist. He's very anti that the film was allowed to be made, and that's fine. Like,
yeah,
people are
interesting.
100% entitled to feel that you shouldn't have done something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm completely comfortable with that,
So how did you get it happening if they own the intellectual property?
Well, the AUC, like any organization, is made up of different people at different times, right? And so, you at one period you initiate it when you're the AUC president, and then you retire, and then there's a whole different group of people.
Right.
And so having that conversation with that different group of people, I think is totally fine. Like they own that, the organization own the IP, and the people at the time when I had a conversation with the leadership of the AUC were like, yeah, Kyle, we don't get how you see it, but we get that you see it in this way, and we're comfortable with you doing it. So go for it.
Right.
And I think that's equally visionary, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just a different set of vision for a different time. And, again, not everyone's going to like you or agree with you all the time, Peter,
Yeah.
I think that's okay too,
I'm glad to see this has cleared up another thing. So Alexander Carpenter, I'm not sure if he was Spectrum editor at the time, but he's doing a great job at Spectrum.
Yeah, and I had a fabulous conversation with Alex. We did
fantastic.
a 2-part podcast actually earlier in the year to coincide with the film coming out over there, and had a really, he, like you, is really good at asking those tough questions about, like, what are you going to do now with the fact that you can talk fairly openly about a range of topics in Adventism? He was quite good at challenging, like, what are you going to add to the conversation now as a result of this?
Yeah.
Which at the time I didn't really know. I said to him in the podcast, I'm like, I'm just a guy making a film, man, but you have to realize you're not, right? Because it's not just any film.
Yeah.
It's a film about a movement and people who are polarizing for a lot of people, and also bring a lot of people together. So,
and essentially, it's a film that is presenting Adventism in a positive light as well. So you have to walk between.
How dare it?
That.
How dare it do that? Right?
But you have to then walk in for yourself to go, is there a responsibility? How
I would even challenge that it paints it in
that.
a positive. I would even challenge that it paints it in a positive light in that sense, right? Like, what I would say is that it looks at the people involved in a very even manner, right? Like, we don't shy away from the fact in the film that Ellen and James argue with each other and don't see eye to eye all the time, right? So, whilst holistically 100%, of course it's going to be positive, because why would you tell a film about the foundation of something that you base your reason for your faith and the way that you live your life negatively? But you can also do it balanced, right? Where there are negative aspects within that positivity. And we shouldn't be afraid to shy away from the fact that it's okay to question. For instance, the way that I treat the visions in The Hopeful is very unique to The Hopeful, and I don't want to lock people into one way of looking at those. Like, I think it's okay for people to be able to go in and did she, didn't she, and for us to have a conversation about, well, what do you think? What do I think? And so the way that I portray them in The Hopeful leaves it open to your interpretation as an audience member. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about with treating an audience as intelligent. The second you've got, if you, not to give the game away, but if you show your interpretation of the interior of that vision and you hear a voice of God, that's locking you into a very specific way of thinking and feeling, right? And I didn't want to do that with an audience. I wanted to give them the latitude and the scope to be able to think however they wanted to think in response to it. And so I think what's going to surprise people is the way that those visions are portrayed cinematically
Yeah.
is going to allow them that space to have that conversation.
Yeah. And I want to comment on that. And I'll just finish this spectrum vibe thing that I wanted to just bring home.
Alex
so
will be
take it off-
very happy with
I
you
can take it
doing
off
that
screen. But if it just goes to show that you've got to be very careful, like things are contextual. So I'm saying to
Yes.
people, oh no, what I'm gathering is that even Chester Stanley thought they were the same, but that's him based on nothing to do with the hopeful, because he says the reality is that both cuts are great, and in the big picture the differences between the two cuts were minor after all. Both cuts use the same footage. The major difference is that the official cut is longer than the other cut, which uses a different method of pulling the story together. And so I inadvertently followed that narrative in, oh, well, I haven't seen The Hopeful, but Chester's saying they're the same. But he was talking about a totally different thing. So it's just another
Yes.
example of having
Yeah.
these conversations helps you to
Yes.
clarify with the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Now, I was
think
watching...
I think just to comment on that too, like I think it's even just, again, we haven't cultivated, I guess, like a really deep sense of creative arts within Adventism,
Not at
right?
all.
So the
Squashed and
basis for which, so it's really easy to go, well, I mean, one person's take is minutely different to another. My challenge to that is that's like saying that like one child is the same as another, right? Like my son is the same as my daughter, right? Because they come from the same parents. So how different could they really be?
Yeah.
And
we know
they are vastly different human
we know
beings.
the reality of that situation. Yeah.
They are vastly different people, as we are. We're all different to each other. And I think, the way that we look at the world is obviously going to infuse the way we tell stories. So I guess my comment to that is that, as The Hopeful is a very different story, those two takes back then on that story were also very, very different. Because of course they're going to be. It's the difference between somebody who saw The Hopeful the other day, and this made me laugh a lot, was very surprised. They were shocked at how they were like, I couldn't understand how they could be so different until I saw them. And they were like, and then they said something that really made me chuckle, because they were like, who knew that the guy whose professional career was filmmaking would be able to make a film? You're like, well, yes. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Like, of course, the guy who makes movies is going to make a movie, and it's going to be very, very different. That seems to be logical, but
Yeah. And I hope that people watching might go, hey, well, maybe we've got a movie in us, and put together something that might be showing the other side of Ellen and Adventism, but to do it
there's already one
professionally.
that exists, and it's fabulous. Like, and again, it's
One
not
that's
going to be everybody's cup.
One that's not so positive about Adventism.
Oh, 100%. You've only got to go. I think Bob Ellis is the guy's name.
Yeah,
he did a film called Nostradamus.
The Nostradamus Kid. Yeah. That's
which again, not my experience with Adventism.
Yeah.
And some people would be go, well, clearly Kyle would not like that film. Like, it's an amazing movie.
Yeah.
Noah Taylor,
the other one with
favorite actors.
What's the other one with the wellness?
On the Road to Wellville.
Road to Wellville.
Again,
with
it's got Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony
in
Hopkins,
the lead role.
Great movie. Yeah, great movie.
And it's got Matthew Broderick, and I forget there's another couple of actors that went on past the making of that too. I mean, I was in New York a couple of months ago and got invited to the 35th anniversary screening of A Cry in the Dark, which was also called Evil Angels. So Fred Skepsey, the Australian director who did that, Meryl Streep sent a message into the cinema, It's incredible, actually, when we look at, there's not a huge body of Adventism in cinema, but it is there. And you've got, Hacksaw Ridge, Andrew Garfield, Vince Vaughn, Mel Gibson directing. It's not big, but it's significant still.
Yeah,
and
I guess I'm
exciting.
saying in the more follow Ellen White's journey from a less positive perspective. I'd love to see something like that. Now,
So there's another film
Yeah.
that just came out and I've not had a chance to see it yet. I think it's called Those Who Wait, and it is doing a limited festival run at the moment, and it's looking at the Millerite movement from a very different lens, like completely different angle again. And I think it's kind of ironic. Like, what are the chances that in 2024 you've got two films
Yes.
looking at the Millerite movement from such polar opposite directions? Like, it's uncanny to me that would be the case. I had no idea.
You're not sure what that one's called?
It's called Those Who Wait, I believe.
Those Who Wait. Oh, we'll have to check.
And the trailer, you can. I think the trailer's on YouTube now. And if you want to talk about a different take on Adventism's like founding roots in Millerism, wow. I mean, that trailer couldn't be any different.
Wow.
And again, I think that it just goes to show that this is a conversation worth having, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a period of time in American history, that Great Awakening, the 1830s era, where people were really challenging the status quo of religion and the way that they viewed science and the world just in general around them, and politics and all sorts of things. So if you have a look at the era that we live in now in 2024, I think there's actually a lot of similarities. I'm fascinated by the fact that Miller and Ellen and Bates and James White and stuff were reacting to almost an undertone of judgment and fear within the churches that they were in at the time. And I'm fascinated that that's almost the same era that we exist in Christianity in 2024. There's a lot of fear and judgment and worry and anxiety amongst the Christian community. And so it's interesting to me, like that parallel that you're able to draw even in the time period, and a similar sense of like, you have a look at the news at the moment, you've got war in Gaza, you've got ongoing war in Ukraine, you've got uncertainty in US election at the moment. There's untold amount of natural disasters going on all over the place all the time. So there's a level of discord going on just in the cacophony of information around us. It's very challenging to people. And it either drives you in one of two directions, right? It drives you to the world is black and white, so therefore this, or wow, like the shades of grey are vast. How do I deal with that?
Yeah. Hey, we're going to have a short break, and we'll be playing some of Blake Robinson's orchestral adding to my song Never Be the Same.
Nice.
And not planned, but that's the break music. And then we'll come back and we'll finish with looking at some of these many comments that have been coming up. And before we just head to break, I was watching Tell the World. It wasn't at a cinema release, but it was an Adventist official kind of hall put on especially for the event. And that moment where Ellen holds up the heavy Bible and pointing to texts and saying, reciting, and the guy's going, "Oh, look, she said this exact thing, and she's not even looking at it." And he looked across at me and he elbowed me and he said, "See, it did happen." And I thought, wow, the power of the cinema, the power of someone being shown on screen. I personally don't believe that happened, but because it was kind of Loughborough, I think, that eventually said, "Oh, my sister told me that one of her friends was there and they said this," and that urban myth turned eventually into a 40-pound Bible, and quoting all these things, and this instance where she said, "Oh yeah, these two guys, we'll see them at the meeting." She said after the fact, not before the fact. Those kind of things that murky the water for me when presented in a movie, and the guy goes, "Yes, see, it is true," validates it. So I want to chat just after the break a little bit about your thoughts on promoting the urban myth there.
I've got a couple of good examples from other films that I've done as well, that nothing to do with Adventism that we can talk about in there too, because that is a really interesting part, and not just of narrative cinema, but it's also the challenge of documentary, right? Like we view documentary as being, well, that's the truth.
No, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when we come back, there's a really great
There's going to be
conversation
bias
there.
there, but
Yes.
even the bias is part of the story, and it
Yes.
affects
Yeah.
how people respond. So I can't wait to chat about that. Those watching, please, we've had so many questions. If it's something you're really keen to have Kyle answer, type away now, even if you've written it before, because we're not going to have time to go back through everything. We will be back very soon.
Even if it's controversial, because I'll
Yeah,
still answer
I
it.
love, before we went to air, you said no topic is off the table, and I love that about you,
Nice.
Kyle. Thank you. We will be back in 5 minutes.
Excellent.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello, and we're back with Kyle Portbury, and we're discussing his new movie, The Hopeful, which will be out in cinemas next week, Thursday, October 17, 2024, if you're watching this in 10 years' time. And I'm certainly going to be watching it next week. And it's been released in the States. You can go to thehopefulmovie.com to find out in the States more about it. We're here in Australia, thehopeful.com.au. So, boy, I'm loving this conversation, and I'm loving that this is SDAQ&A in motion, where people are saying positive, negative. I love it because it's all about the dialogue and the learning that comes from that. So I'll randomly go to some comments. Clancy had written a very good comment to me. Where has it gone? Sorry. Yeah, about my idea that if you put your creative produce endeavors into the public eye and get to the point where you have hate and love, eventually you find out who you are and your authentic self, and it dispels anxiety. She did point out that great that it worked for you, Pete. That's not going to work for everyone's mental health. And
no, certainly not.
That is very true. And I did write back and say, look, I probably needed to add a caveat to that.
I mean, that love hate did remind me. If you've never seen Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum, to be honest with you, if you're talking about the challenges of Adventist culture, the fact that we haven't propagated a love of classic cinema is half the problem why this is the first time really an Adventist film has even been talked about, right? Because there's just not that many people for whom cinema's a big deal. So just knowing that film exists in black and white, was made in the 1950s. Robert Mitchum, powerhouse performance, and stylistically, it's probably one of the most geometrically visual, frame within frame films that you'll ever see, and it's got just amazing performances even today. Very not what we expect of cinema in this day and age. It's definitely dated, but is still an incredible experience.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'll check that out later as well.
Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter.
Yeah. Robert Mitchum plays an itinerant preacher who murders people. There's this huge chat. Anyway, not to ruin it, but I mean, it has been out for literally 80 years. So, probably there's enough spoilers out there. But
I've just Googled that. Look, can't wait.
Just an incredible movie.
And again, SDAQ&A in motion. I want to thank Clancy. She's added, that I seem to be making a broad statement that this will get rid of all anxiety and depression. I was tongue in cheek with a bit of a smile going on, but I think for those who missed that, she makes a very good point. And that's why, again, I love doing this program, because people even call me out all the time. And I get to go, good point, Clancy. I will be more careful making that, because mental health is a huge issue that I address and do a lot of work with people helping with. So I apologize for that flippant statement. And if you're willing to put 8 years in of getting hate and love at the same time, and be aware that the first 2 years will probably almost give you a nervous breakdown, my method might be something you want to try. I'm not recommending it. But I guess I was observing that both you and I have been through the mill as far as sharing our creative endeavors, and that if you persist, you can get to the other side where you can have a meaningful conversation, whereas earlier on you may not have been able to, I guess is my point. So look, lots of great comments coming in. Let's see, one from Joy Marie Butler.
I'm late. Where are we up to?
My question now
is, just to recap,
this is a popular movie in the USA and a crowd's coming to see it. So has it been popular in the USA, and have people been going to see it, I guess is her question.
Yeah, and I think, kind of amazingly, we spent 2 days in the top 10 at the US box office back in April. And the film was viewed by lots and lots of non-Adventists, and again, the commentary on that was hugely fun and, thought-provoking, and, getting a take from people that have never heard of Adventism before and are just connecting with character. For them, anyone that's never heard of the Adventist movement before does not view the film in that lens. They view it through the lens of character, which is to me what cinema's all about, right? Cinema is character driven. And so, when you get that feedback from audiences over there, and it's got a 93% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty cool, I think, for a film, of an indie movie from Australia. It's not a bad outcome.
That's really good.
we've qualified for Oscars and Golden Globes this year, and
it's fantastic,
it's good fun.
And it's paving the way for not only more conversation, but hopefully within Adventism more creative output. The reason I started SDAQ&A was because in about 1993, 95, when I had my music shop, and I remember your face at barn nights at Avondale, but that would have been maybe early 2000s.
It was less bearded back in those days. I think I was, my barn night appearances were from 1997 through to 2002 with a hiatus in between, I think.
Yes, right,
so.
yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's where I first got to know you. But when I first started my shop, where was I going with that? What did I say? Oh, I can't even remember.
Well, something about creativity and putting yourself out there, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So I endeavored to, I was on a mission when I started my shop in the early 90s to put out a newsletter or magazine that promoted Adventist creative artists, musicians, writers, whatever. So this is 93 to 95.
Yeah.
Where I would interview people. I'd give the platform for the present. I really wanted to honor those in the past, people like Ray Dixon, no relative of mine, no relation to me, but in 1957, he had a #1 hit, A Town Like Alice, in Australia, and went on to become a pastor and gave up that whole thing. I wanted Adventists to know about him. I wanted Adventists to know about Bob Wolfgram, who had influenced me in the late 70s, early 80s with his music. There seemed to be within Adventism no thread for the creative arts. Plenty of understanding of, they all know who Pastor George Burnside is, and up to Ford and all back to Ballinger and Wagner and Jones, but the creatives get lost in the cracks. So I had this vision of putting together some kind of magazine where I would promote the current artists, encourage future artists, and honor the ones from the past. And I even got to the point of releasing a few, I think we called it Tempo or something, and there was ads in it. I think Blake was involved at some point in the 90s, helping me with that. He's everywhere, and
except here apparently.
Except here today.
He's everywhere except
Blake,
here.
Are you ready? Come and join us for 5 minutes if you are. So my point is that. And it didn't happen until I thought about SDAQ&A with social media and stuff. So my very first episodes of SDAQ&A that never saw the light of day, that are in the can still, were this concept of promoting the Adventist arts and artists, because there's so many creatives that just fall away and get forgotten. And this is a long story about saying what you're doing is finally starting to break some of those barriers, and hopefully Adventists that are watching this will get inspired to go, hey, I want to put together my thoughts, my feelings within an Adventist context or outside of it or whatever way, but just be creative, get out there, do stuff.
Yes.
And this is separate to my philosophy of anxiety, depression. That was I shouldn't have said it. But the point is, Adventist creatives get lost in the cracks. And I'm hoping that the big, this project, as you said, you're getting, did you say nominations for?
Well, no. So the way that awards season in the US works is that you have to do a certain number of days with a certain amount of screenings every day in the US, even to just be in contention to be considered.
Right.
And so any given year, the couple thousand films that release in America every year, there's only ever about 200 to 300 of them that meet the criteria, and that's all based on a scale of economics, right? It's how many days did you stay in cinemas for, and people came along and watched it, which is literally, when it's called the entertainment business, that's the benchmark for them is, okay, well, if it got to cinema, it's a tick that it's creatively up to scratch. Right? And then they set that aside completely and go, so the only other benchmark that means anything in the creative business sense is, were you able to actually do business?
Yeah.
Right. And so when you look at that, just the fact that we were able to do business for enough time to be in contention with all of the other films that will be in contention for the awards this year,
Yeah.
Is pretty incredible to me, right? Like that, it's hugely exciting that conversation around anticipation and disappointment and, the Adventist story is part of that larger conversation in the body of work that is cinema for 2024.
Yeah.
I think in and of itself, that's exciting.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. You're
Yeah.
forging new ground that has to have a spill-off effect that I bet you've noticed already, where young creatives are going, hey, asking you for advice. You're getting a chance to help, create a new environment within Adventism
Yes.
that many of us have
Yeah.
tried, but this might be a successful spearhead into a new opportunity for young Adventist creatives to express themselves.
I talked to a couple of young filmmakers from Brazil a couple of weeks ago who it's the first time that they've gone, actually, cinema is something that we can do, and it blows my mind that, we still feel in 2024 that we have to ask permission from someone
I know.
to do something. You kind of like, I would challenge people all the time.
You
that
make
would
a
come up-
movie on one of these.
Yeah.
Such high quality, release your movies on YouTube.
It surprises me that otherwise adult human beings have to ask you, are we allowed to go to cinema now? You're like, I mean, I don't know. Like, are you? I mean, I'm fairly sure you can do whatever you like, right? Like, the world is your oyster as far as that goes.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the heart of what, if we're going to affect culture in our context, whether that's you're an Adventist now, you were an Adventist, you don't know whether you are or not, like, doesn't really matter. Like, that culture still has influenced, that's still a major influence on your life. If you're talking about it in any sense, good, bad, or indifferent, that's a cultural effect that you have. And I think, to go back to what you were saying about the way that art has typically been looked at through the lens of Adventism, was more or less an illustration for the main event, which was the sermon, right? That was the thing that the emphasis was placed on. And I think there's an interesting, opportunity opening up to us that those perspectives are broadening, right? Like, it won't just be, and you look at the times that we live in, right? Like, the sermon is becoming less and less isolated as the only thing that people interact with from a faith perspective. And so I think you're going to find that we're going to need people who are able to tell the stories, good, bad, or indifferent, in every medium imaginable, right? Like the painters, the sculptors who put a sculpture in a public space, and that sculpture provokes thought, and, everybody looks at it from a slightly different angle, I think the thing that scares people about that is that you can't dictate to people how they think and feel in relation to art. And so that's scary to people. If you feel that, well, how are they going to know the truth if I don't tell them and spell it out in the little thing underneath the sculpture, right? This is exactly what this means, and this is how you should think about it. Again, I think that goes back to just being brave enough to go, I'm going to put this out there, and that's it. I'm going to walk away and let you do whatever you want, right? I'm going to treat you like an adult human being that you are, and assume that you're intelligent enough to be able to deal with it as presented, without the explanation of the guy that made it.
Yeah. And I think that when, like, some of the reason we're getting polarized thoughts is that some people assume other people's intentions, and therefore that becomes how their narrative.
Yes.
And
look,
so
that's an easy trap to fall into, right?
Yeah.
Like, people will go, well, did you mean this in that moment of the hopeful? It doesn't matter what I meant in that.
Yeah.
Because what I meant in it is not going to be what you see, right? Because I could mean several different things.
And I think too that traditionally speaking, when movies like this have come out, and which, in my humble opinion, the Tell the World movie was used this way, was this is an opportunity for us to spread the Adventist message and get converts. So traditionally, most Adventist media
Yes.
When I watch this one, if I think otherwise, and I'm sure I'm going to, it will be the first big Adventist relief that is sort of semi-sanctioned that isn't proselytizing. So you can't really blame the Jimmy Jameses and the Ray Rays, and because the vast collective of Adventist resource is scripted and proselytized material. And so when they see something like they're just going to instantly think that about this project.
Yeah.
So back to what I was saying about urban myths and that guy, as I'm watching Tell the World,
Yes.
he's elbowing me when she's holding up the Bible and pointing to texts, and someone's on the ladder going, oh, that's the exact text she's quoting is the one she's pointing to. And he nudges me and says, see, it did happen.
Yeah.
With the power that you have there, and when you know from researching that that actual event, people have believed the Loughborough version, who heard it from her sister, who also wasn't even there.
Yes.
Whereas the eyewitness lady that was there said, yeah, she held up the heavy family Bible for a couple of minutes and put it down. There's no big deal there. So why include that if it's a known high chance of being an urban myth, A, and B, oh, look at that. How did I do that? And B, why do people, and you'd have to understand the psychology of people to do any kind of filmmaking or storytelling.
Yes.
Why do people yearn for the Loughborough version of a 40-pound Bible being held up? I watched a recent White Estate release on this very topic, and this is the exact Bible that we believe she held up, well, a replica of it, and she held it up, and look how heavy it is. And I even did a comedic version of me holding up the equivalent with barbells, and I could do it for 2 minutes, but there's no way I could have held it up for the alleged amount of what 40 minutes or something that she allegedly held it up. So it's physically impossible. So Adventists then go, oh, well, it's a miracle, but the eyewitness says it was a couple of minutes and it maybe wasn't the big heavy Bible. Why do people, so this is a two-part question. A, why did you include it when it's pretty sure that it didn't happen? And B, why do people want that version? Why do they want that miracle when isn't the content of what she's saying more important and unnecessarily needed? Why do we gravitate to these big stories that aren't even true?
Yeah. Well, let me answer that in two parts, right? Using a different example of another film that I did. So I won an Emmy in 2018 for a film about Sojourner Truth, who, was known to, she lived in Battle Creek. She did, much of, her life was spent later on in the general vicinity. She knew the Whites, she knew Joseph Bates, she was part of that Underground Railroad stop there. So she has this really famous speech and it's particularly well known as an African-American women's rights speech. And it's Ain't I a Woman, right? It's one of the most influential African-American female speeches of all time. It has been quoted by presidents, actors, you name it, everyone does this speech. The speech that everyone quotes was written 12 years after the fact by someone who was there, right? There's another version of that speech that nobody ever references or quotes, which was written by a man at the time, literally while she was dictating it on stage. And it reads nothing like, it doesn't even have the phrase, ain't I a woman in it.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, interesting.
So when you look at that as a filmmaker, you go, well, from a pure story standpoint, the one written 12 years later is far more interesting. And if anyone wants to go and look at the history of that event and look at the two different versions and make their own conclusion up, right, they're going to do that if they're interested, And if they're not, I challenge people to be like, just because it's in a movie doesn't mean that everyone is going to, or no one's going to think it's real. You're not, I'm not bound by the same responsibility as an artist, as somebody writing a historical text. You know, my job is to take you on a journey that has a holistic feel about it, right? I'm trying to give you an experience of going to the cinema and experiencing something. You know, it's not as interesting to go with a version of that story that is less interesting, right? And so I'm always going to go with the, well, if there's a question, did she, didn't she? I'm going to go, well, which is the more interesting version of did she, didn't she? You know,
the Irish have that saying, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
And whether it's true or not is up to the person. That's the discussion that you're going to have with people afterwards. Like I did a film, I followed 7 disabled climbers up Kilimanjaro. I did a film called The Mountain Within back in, I think, 2008. So we went up, you know, all these people, you know, were there, released in cinemas in Europe, coincided with the Special Olympics in 2010, I think it was. Fabulous film, you know, at the premiere, all the people that were there, you know, so there's 7 disabled climbers, all of their support climbers and everybody. So these people were physically on the mountain with me. There's a moment where you get to a place called Stella Point, which is, oh no, not Stella Point, it's the high camp. So there's a camp before that you base from to go and do your summit attempt the next day. And I forget what that camp was called. But when you get there, the porters do this big celebration, song and dance thing for you, and everyone's excited. No one can breathe because you're 15,000 feet up in the air. And, you know, like its purpose is to get you excited about getting up at midnight and walking in the dark for the next 7 hours, like one foot in front of the other, and being in pain to get to the summit the next day, right? Cinematically, it doesn't work to tell that story in chronological order because you haven't got to the top, so no one's achieved anything. So this big celebration at the base of the summit attempt day contextually in reality works, but in the grand scheme of a story that you're trying to tell has no payoff, right? It's kind of like usurping the payoff in the story. And so I shifted that moment cinematically to after the 3 of the 7 climbers made it to the top. Literally every person in that cinema after the premiere, and you know, we'd only climbed the mountain maybe a year ago. Their recollection of what order those events happened in was what they saw in the film.
Yeah, I know. But
you know, that's the power of cinema, you know. And if you get bogged down in the, well, if I can't do this because of what this person might think, and I better not tell the story like that because I might offend this person, and I can't, oh, what do I do? You're never actually going to make anything, right? Like, so what you have to do is go, this is the story that I feel serves the real people that lived in a way that is showing them in a light that I think is then giving an audience an opportunity to go any direction they want. Right? And they can think and feel how they want to do. It's allowing them to experience that. And, you know, I'm sure people will be like, oh, you know, so you're making things up. No, these things may have happened, may not have. No one was there to say definitively it did or it didn't. And so that's what I weigh. If there's definitive evidence that something definitely didn't happen.
Well, there was an eyewitness there that said that didn't happen.
And there's eyewitnesses there that say that person also was not being truthful about it.
There's no eyewitnesses that were there. There's no eyewitnesses that were there that say that. There's people that weren't there.
You know more than I do about that side of it.
There's people that weren't there that say she was inaccurate.
Well, see, we're all learning something from there.
But again, that's separate to what you're talking about.
But you see, even if I'd known that at the time of deciding whether or not that made it in the film or not, you know, that wouldn't necessarily flavor whether or not that made it in. You know?
Yeah, because the story told of this hopeful community that you're an observer telling their story.
Yeah,
it is a component of their story.
Correct. Yeah.
And
so I think there's something really, somebody's made the comment about baby reindeer comes to mind. Is it a true story, right? Like that. I mean, that's the challenge. Anytime you're telling the story of real people, where does myth start and reality stop,
Well, I
and
think
vice
that
versa.
the reaction to the reindeer one was
Yeah.
because they said it was real. You have at least said it's
Yes.
based on true
Yes,
stories
correct.
and true
Yeah.
events. And I
Yeah.
think that
Whereas they
was
were saying that was actually, and I
Yeah.
think that's why you've got to be really careful about how you frame your storytelling sometime, right?
Yeah.
Like if you say, this is the truth
And it's
of
not a
this
story
story.
that has been told that someone's observing and retelling. This is someone saying, here's the story.
Yeah.
So there's some differences there. I guess, did you
But it's
feel a responsibility, though, when you know people so well, no storyteller, like you've even just demonstrated how well you
Yes.
know people,
Yeah.
when you know that 90% of people are going to nudge the person next to them and go, see, it did happen. And then 10% of people like me are going to go, dude, it's a movie. Like, and when you know that it's going to be used to proselytize the Adventist church, people into the churches, whether you wanted it to or not, it's going
Yes.
to be used for that.
Undoubtedly.
When you include urban myths and the one about the two gentlemen, she said that
Sergeant
she was
Robbins, who
she
was
was going
great.
to see them there,
Great
where in fact
characters.
she generally, like, I love that people talk about the time where she predicted the 1908 San Francisco earthquake. I think that's the date. She didn't predict it. When she was there, she said, oh, I saw this in vision a few weeks ago, something like that. So when you're faced with these kind of parts of the story to include, when you know it's going to be used as a proselytizing arm, whether you want to or not, and you know that you're going to have all the nudges going, see, it did happen. Did that come into play at all? Or were you, again, stepping back, observer, telling the story that's already been told in a new way?
I think the way that I look at it is, if you take on the responsibility of how people are going to think and you start trying to, in another way, right? You go, oh, well, I don't like the way that this particular part of that story plays out, right? So I'm going to remove it, you start losing sight of what the actual narrative drive and actual story experience, right? You go back to that, talking about that ride that you're taking people on, and now you're second guessing yourself on every story point. How is someone going to perceive this? What's this going to be read at? Will someone nudge the person next to them and go, see, I'm able to bash you over the head with that now, and now you're not a storyteller anymore. You're actually doing the work of a propagandist.
Yeah.
And so I just divorce myself of how anyone's going to think about it, and I just go, well, this is what the material that I'm looking at is telling me. And I follow the story that I shot, right?
Yeah.
And I'm divorced of all, it's like, you can look at a scene sometimes and be like, oh, it was 40 degrees that day, and it took so long to get this, and there's so much effort went into getting this moment. I can't possibly not include that in the film. Versus sitting in an air-conditioned studio in Sydney years later going, who cares? Right? If it doesn't serve the story that is being told, then it's out. It goes on the cutting room floor. So I think you just have to be really clear on the story that you're telling, and then it's up to an audience to decide what they want to do with that. And I think with art, you get into a really complicated place if you take on the responsibility of how someone's going to respond to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think it's actually dangerous to do that as an artist, because if you start censoring yourself because you're afraid of what someone's going to think about you because of the way that you portrayed that.
And I think especially if you make yourself available to have this kind of conversation.
Yes.
One of the really big things that bugs me about Adventist apologists, for some reason it bugs me more than it did when I was an Adventist, is that everything is scripted. And when I was watching a few interviews this week just in preparation for today, and you're one of a handful of people who, you're putting Adventism's best foot forward. But and there's a handful of, I won't start naming, but I can think of them. There's a handful of people that I've interviewed in the last, 300 episodes, and a handful that I watch out there on YouTube and the social media land that actually are happy to go unscripted and have a conversation, answer the big questions. It frustrates the heck out of me. The clever wording, everything scripted. Glenn Townend does a presentation on women in women's ordination and subtly says women in ministry, and Ted Wilson, it's all scripted. All from Doug Batchelor to a bunch of these promos I've watched this week from guys promoting the hopeful and tell the world from the past. It's all smolchy, scripted, drives me nuts. I wish Adventists would just come on this show and other shows, just shoot from the hip. You might be wrong, you might be right, you might get it, like today, that template. What is it within Adventism and Adventist apologists that make them desire to be so scripted?
We don't like generally as people to be vulnerable, right? Somebody, I forget who it was earlier that, after I kind of pushed back on a comment, there was a couple of comments from that person about, oh, he's triggered, look at him get all defensive. I'm like, yeah, because that's human nature, right? Like if you feel that you've been misrepresented by somebody's comment, of course you're going to feel a little bit put out. But I think if we're not willing to allow ourselves to get triggered by something, right? Like I think that person felt that was a bad thing, right? And okay,
they must have watched the show very often.
Like getting triggered by things is a natural response to life. Like we all get triggered by stuff all the time. It isn't actually, I don't think it's actually a triggering in the sense of, I think we misuse that word a lot. What it actually is that we're having an emotional response to feeling like we're being put in a context we don't like. And I think that's a difficult place for people. And a lot of people struggle to get over that quickly. And so they go, well, why put myself in that situation?
In the first place.
In the first place.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like this all the time. Whereas, I've spent a lot of time doing interviews over the last couple of years. And so I move on really quickly, and have forgotten about this stuff by the next day. And I also don't go back and read things that people write about it
me too.
In the post, because I just think, well, that was the moment when we were here and we had this conversation. And
get bogged down.
I don't need to go and relitigate or defend the way that I articulated myself. And I also think it's more interesting, right? Like somebody said that same thing to me the other day. They're like, we've not seen you do the same interview twice in the last 2 years. And I'm like, because how boring would that be?
Yeah, I know.
And again, I'll go back to that point. My opinion on stuff changes with my experience with the world around me. So I don't necessarily.
But I guess that's what I'm saying. Why are you so unique and so rare? Like I know it's human nature to not put yourself on the spot and be nervous about. Someone said to me after I interviewed them the other day, they said, "Oh, next time I need to choose, do I want to be drilled by Peter Dixon or the dentist?" Oh, and I thought that was funny. And I was hardly drilling. I was hardly drilling at all. But Adventists are uniquely sensitive, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it because it annoys the heck out of me.
We have a fear of if we say something wrong, someone's going to be like, see, we knew it. Like,
and they might lose their job.
And they might lose their job over it, right? And that's a really big factor for people. It's why politicians can't give a straight answer.
Would you be as open and unscripted if you were on the payroll from them to do this project?
Absolutely not. And I imagine that like 100% of people would be the same, because if your paycheck is like required for you to toe the party line, how can you blame people for being careful about the way that they say things? Because they're going to have to sit in a nominating committee at some point in the next little while. And a whole bunch of people in there are going to do exactly what we do on the sidelines of this conversation. But the difference is that person's livelihood, health and pension are on the line. Like, why would you go, I'm going to speak my mind to the risk of my health insurance?
I had I was chatting to a young guy in his mid-40s, maybe, working at the SPD, who was dying to speak out in support of a lot of the LGBT stuff. And I was having lunch with him, and he just said, look, the reality is I can't speak about women's ordination. I can't speak about the gay stuff because I'd lose my job, and I've got a mortgage, 2 kids, and a wife, and that rely on me. And
So how do you?
I didn't judge him for that at all. Of
Yeah.
course, you know.
And I think there's something valuable in, you know, like
It's
for me, because I work with the organizations now, I don't work for them.
Yeah.
You're able, I mean, they're all very aware that I'm free to speak my mind whenever I like, right? And I'm not particularly concerned about, you know, one particular organization might like, I don't like the way you articulate that, Colin. I'm like,
Yeah.
That's fine. Don't work with me again. You know, like it's okay, you know, to not agree and go, well, we don't think you represent our brand, because quite frankly, you know, loads of people are going to think that you don't do that. You know, Coca-Cola, if you think the Adventist Church is the only one that is a propagandist when it comes to going, we want to present ourselves.
Yeah.
You go and work for a Fortune 500.
Well, you'll be signing non-disclosure agreements.
I mean, I work for companies all the time for which I have to sign a contract saying I will not talk about this thing that I'm developing for you, right? Yeah. Because those studios know that, you know, sometimes those things never get made, and they want to project everything that we touch is gold. Nothing happens without, you know, getting finished, right? But that's not the reality of it.
Yeah, there's the reality of the way of the world.
Yes.
I guess where I'm going with the Adventist one is there just seems to be a bit more of it. Like it's jacked up higher than what I would expect is healthy for a religious movement to be so controlled.
You've met Catholics, right?
And they're moving in the direction of being less controlling.
They've got as much guilt as everybody.
You can join an order, though. That, you know, if you don't,
yes, you can. You can choose your own eventual
order. I mean, that's a whole other topic. I think there's an order within Adventism of the Des Ford theology that is so powerful that it's almost like 2 churches in one. Yeah. But those that are in that order don't even admit that they are. They view themselves as just an extension of Adventism, whereas I believe they're a whole new hybrid. But that's a whole other topic.
I think what's fascinating, and you know, I'm not going to directly answer that question in this, but it's prompted me to think about it. I think there's very few people. What I will say about me is that I don't think there's a lot of people that have decided to view their Adventism and their role within that positively, and actually be out there talking about it, right? I think there's a lot of people who, when they talk about it, it's from the negative side of it, which is fine, right? Go for your life. Like, you know, if that's your experience, like, talk about it, be open about it, do whatever you like with it, right? But I think the problem that we have is when anyone talks positively about their experience, we tend to write that off really quickly. We're like,
I think it's more that when they speak positively, they do it scripted, or they reveal very soon that they can't answer any hard questions. So when
that may be the case,
when Adventists speak positively about the church, I go, awesome, good. So what do you think about that?
Yes.
What about that? So I'm not trying to trick them or give them a gotcha moment. I'm just fine. Well, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Can you defend it? Yes. And they can't, and unless they're scripted, and you can't ask hard questions.
Yeah, and
whereas I don't find that when I chat to Uniting Church people or Methodists or Catholics, or there's something within Adventism that is ratcheted up with suppression. And so people who want to speak boldly, even it's difficult to get even the conservative people to come on and speak positively, because they know they don't know their material well enough. I've had people say, only if we have the questions and answers already organized. And that's not what I want. So I guess, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I just, for some reason, and maybe this conversation, we cannot answer it today, but maybe it stimulates some people thinking and can give some good answers as to why it's a little bit more
I can attempt to do it
than elsewhere.
Yeah, I can attempt to do it culturally. And I think it comes back to that thing that we were talking about before because we pulled ourselves out a little bit, right? It's almost a circle the wagons mentality at this stage. And I've seen this with the opening up that people have done around the film. So when people bring their non-Adventist friends to it, what you really quickly pick up is that those Adventists have never really talked about their Adventism to people they've known for 15 or 20 years.
100%.
Because they're afraid that person is going to view them as weird and
Yeah.
They're going to look at the story, be like, why would you possibly think that this is an acceptable story to base your life on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's interesting to me and what I've really enjoyed, is say what you will about Ellen White, right? Think whatever you like about her, but you cannot deny that her influence has been her influence. She has had an influence on society that I think is quite unique, and that's worth talking about. I think it's fantastic that there are very few, there's maybe 2 or 3 women in the 1800s in a religious context that have had the kind of agency and long-lasting legacy, good, bad, or indifferent, that she's had. And I think that's worth talking about. That in and of itself is something worth discussing. And when we're looking at those bigger conversations around women's ordination, for instance, and again, I'm not qualified to talk on this. I am not a biblical scholar. I'm also not a church scholar. But what I will say is that as a father of a daughter, when I looked at that conversation going on at, I forget what even, GC that was at, where that vote was on the floor. When I looked at that, I think the thing that made me pause for a second was, well, what message am I sending to my daughter, who at the time was like, I think maybe 6 months old? I'm like, how do I want her to view her role in not only just general society, but within the context of, and you've got 2 daughters, right? Like,
yeah. We viewed that at the same time.
Yes.
You had your 6-month-old, and Hudson would have been about 2.
Yes. Correct.
As we were watching those back. And my reaction was, I can't put my name to it. See you later.
Yeah.
And I don't judge that yours wasn't. Yeah. This is the whole point of this conversation.
Mine was, I want to be part of the conversation moving forward. And it took a while to get there, right? Like, I want to be part of this conversation because I want to affect and provoke.
Which within the church you can't. I've had more conversations about women's ordination and affecting and influencing the topic than I ever could have if I'd stayed in the church.
The interesting thing is I've had the opposite opportunity, right? Like, because I've had the opportunity to converse with a whole broad range of people in the church. I get to go behind.
And you aren't tethered to them.
And I'm not tethered to them financially.
Yeah. So we're both kind of an interesting. We've both had an ability to do that because of not being tethered.
And I think I'd agree. So Andy Mack has just raised a really good point. Yeah, I think there is a fear of being perceived as a cult, right? Even within Adventism, like, we're afraid that people are going to be like, oh, really? You buy into that weirdness of, the pushback we've had, which is really fascinating in the general Christian audience in the US and Australia. There's a real fear about, well, we can't possibly show a film that talks about Sabbath to a non-Sabbath going congregation, and like, oh, we're not quite sure about like this Ellen White business, so therefore we shouldn't talk about it. You're like, why not? Like, if you'll talk about the tenuous thread of Christianity to Deadpool, then why wouldn't you talk about something else that's a little bit more closely aligned with your values and moral basis, And I like to provoke people. I like to hear from, there's a really big influencer in the US in the Christian evangelical movement who kind of is the gatekeeper to a lot of evangelicals going to movies and endorsing it. And I was able to challenge, he was like, I can't promote this film because, like, we go to church on Sunday and you go to church on Saturday. And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, sucks to be you, doesn't it? Like, I'm sorry that you feel like it's a threat. Like, I feel almost like, and I said this to him face to face. I was like, I'm almost flattered that you think it's that, like, it's that persuasive as a movie that you're worried that members of your congregation might like decide that they're now suddenly Sabbath keepers, right? Like, it's an illogical fear. And I guess that what all fear is illogical in many ways, like we have a fear of the unknown. So therefore we go, well, if I'm afraid of it, then I can't possibly talk about it or touch it. Because what happens if that fear is reality? And again, this goes back to what I was talking about failure. Actually the value of fear is going, well, but what happens if I try it and then the thing ends up being positive? like it's that curiosity and that being willing to put yourself out there and have other people go, no, that is not what that looks like, Kyle, and you're an idiot for even thinking that. It might be in that challenge to you about the way that you think, that you go, oh, I might look at that more closely. I might investigate that more. I might make a movie about it. Dare I say? It's a lot of fun to be challenged and to respond to the people in the world. Both people who have got your best interests at heart and also people that don't.
Yeah.
That is challenging though, and that is hard for people, I think, particularly from a cultural background where, possibly another reason why it's so difficult for Adventists is that we've told ourselves that we have the truth for so long that it's hard to navigate outside of, well, but what if this aspect of it isn't exactly how we saw it 50 years ago, right? And that's scary for people. And I think it's understandable that you would get those walls and those barriers and those defenses up.
Well, Ellen talks about those people who do question as being part of the shaking. So if you find yourself questioning and doing what I did, you're like, oh, that's confirmation. She predicted that would happen. It makes it even harder to navigate that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's fabulous, like that challenging and the doubting. I mean, biblically, doubting is not looked at as a negative, right? Have a look at, and it was interesting because I was just at the Rise conference in Orlando for the Southern Union, and they had a duo called the Skit Guys who are much bigger in the US than they are here, and they're basically like a comedy skit.
Adventist guys?
No, not Adventist.
Oh, right.
But they were the headline entertainment at the banquet.
Adventists need more comedians.
Yeah, and then these guys
are laughing themselves.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they've put a film out called Family Camp, which is a faith comedy movie about family camp, right, for Christians, and it's really quite funny, but it's got some really great moments that really make you think, within that, the humor side of that, and one of the things that they did as part of their sketch comedy on the evening really actually made it's all fairly light and flippant until it isn't. And that's the beauty of comedy, right? Yes. When all of a sudden it turns on you and you're like, oh, yeah. And I saw, so they did the conversation between Peter and Christ, right? After Peter realizes that this person on the shore is actually Christ. And the perspective shift that they gave me was in the way that Peter saw himself up until that point. Right. And suddenly I saw that moment in the Gospels very, very differently because Peter saw himself as, still part of the crowd. I'm still one of the disciples. I just got it a bit wrong and I denied Christ. Whereas actually what happens when you look at it in the plain, it's Mary, go and tell the disciples and Peter.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow. Like this whole, the way that I looked at that part of the gospel 5 seconds ago is now completely different because actually when you look at the language, it's very clear that Christ had not included Peter as part of the disciples after that moment, up until that moment where he reconciles with him on the beach. And Peter gets that the relationship got damaged, right? And that it's okay to need forgiveness and to reconnect that relationship, And I looked at that and I was like, wow, that is, and I guess going back to, yes, the Gospels are the Gospels, but I would double back down on my comment earlier on in this, that they are not immovable, right?
Yeah.
Because even in that example there, those are the same words I had understood 5 seconds earlier. And then those guys unpacked it in a way that made me look at it from a slightly different angle. And therefore, that's now a living, breathing relationship conversation with that word, dare I say, which is very, very different. You look at that and you're like, oh, man, this is all about relationships, isn't it? Like relationship is the secret source of all of life. And I think that that desire that we have to propaganda, right? To be propagandists, when it becomes misplaced is when it's devoid of relationship, right? Like if your desire is to get into relationship with somebody, and to seriously want to journey through life with them, regardless of where they're at and regardless of where you're at, then you're going to have an interesting conversation, and they're going to be more open to you about your opinion on life and, dare I say, the gospel and your understanding of it, than they would be if you just thrust a bit of literature at them with no relationship attached to it, right? That's not a conversation at all. And so I think if you're, if you go back to why the hopeful and why now for me, it's simply an opportunity to have a greater level of relationship to the community with which you live in around a story that is hugely integral to the way that you live, either good, bad, or indifferent, and being able to have that conversation with the people you're in relationship with is something I think really valuable to us. I think that's really, it's needed, in fact. And, Andy says, what is the gospel? I mean, it's irrelevant what I give as a one-sentence soundbite to that, other than its relationship. That in its nutshell is what the gospel is. And if you're not willing to get into relationship with people and have the hard questions put at you and look uncomfortable and not know the answer straight away to something and have to think about it, that is uncomfortable and it is vulnerable, and because people will pull sections out of this and they'll go, see, this is what the director of The Hopeful thinks about X, Y, Z, and if I was a younger man, dare I say, in my mid-30s instead of my mid-40s, I would probably be sitting here having a very different conversation with you, because I would be afraid of what that out of context soundbite meant for my future. Whereas now I'm like, whatever. There's that many out of context sound bites out there. It's irrelevant at this point.
And that's part of the mental health stuff that I'm talking about. When you learn to cope with that and be okay with that, that's an important place to be. But it's hard to get there.
Yes.
So Clancy, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not recommending it. But the observation of what is manifested from when you can journey from not being able to do that 10 years ago to being able to do that now, you've had to go through hard times to get to that now. And it's the hard times that can refine you. And I would encourage anyone watching that is an Adventist apologist from a more conservative or liberal, whatever side of the Adventist spectrum you're on, I'm hoping that this conversation today has encouraged people to come on the program, because there are not too many social media platforms that aren't an echo chamber. And we are not an echo chamber. Some people say, oh, you just want them on your show. Well, where else can they go? Like, there's not too many places you can really speak your mind.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to come. Hey, I want to ask you,
on the flip side to that, Peter, I had a fabulous conversation with the guy. So I got interviewed on Fox News earlier in the year. And you talk about, the Fox News is not my place, right? Like, that's not where I go for news.
Well, if you're being willing to be authentic and open, you'll find yourself anywhere
at all. And actually, that was probably one of the most open conversations I ended up having on the PR circuit around the release in the US, because we got into this really interesting conversation about the nature of the moment in time that we're at in the world at this point, and how to have a civil discourse with. And you're sitting there going, am I having this conversation on Fox? How is this even possible, right? Like, it was just a really great open conversation that both, myself and the host were willing to have in that moment, and it was just really fascinating to me afterwards. I was like, wow, that was not at all how I expected that conversation to go.
Yeah. Which is fun.
So fun. And you and some other ones you think are going to be really like easy and relaxed end up being like, oh, that did not go at all how I thought that was going to be like a walk in the park, not a lot of hard questions. And then you get so it's all fun, and I think it's all an opportunity to talk about things that matter to us. So
Have you met Ted Wilson? And I'm pretty sure he loved Tell the World.
Yeah, and really supportive of the hopeful as well. And again, there's lots of, and I'm sure Ted's aware of this because I've talked to him a couple of times, like I'm sure he's aware that he and I don't agree on a lot of stuff, but I can still appreciate Ted the man as a human being. He's actually a lovely guy, and I've had nothing but great chats with him when we've got together.
I respect that he's very clear about what he
yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to read between the lines with him.
Yeah.
But when I listen to so many other Adventist apologists, I'm like, what do they really think? I don't have to do that with him. I know what he really thinks.
You get
and I can then
100%
disagree or agree.
Yeah, but
I
he'll take a challenge in the sense that, like, he's not going to change his opinion on that, but he respects you going, I don't agree with you on this. You know, like, why do we need to die on this particular hill, whatever it is, when you're talking candidly on the sidelines of something, Tell
him to come on the show.
Yeah.
Now, if you're watching and enjoying the content, just a quick plug, please go and, if you think this is a valuable platform, I'm talking to the audience, please go to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, even though I'm doing less music now since lockdown because of this podcast 3 times a week now. Look, if you've got a couple of dollars, you want to see it keep going, there's expenses every month, as you know, being in social media yourself, platform hosting, podcast hosting, website hosting. It's not cheap. And I dedicate at least 10 up to 15 hours now a week on it. I love it. I do it for nothing. But if you've got a couple of dollars and you're watching, that would really help. Now, I said we'd go to lots of questions, and we kind of haven't really. So let me just bring a couple up that have come through. I'll just randomly, not even read. You're not obsessed with Ellen White. So this was my comment, obviously, about Vanishing Vernon earlier. You're not obsessed with Ellen White. It's just that SDAism is so saturated with her, it takes so much effort to disentangle her words from the words of the Bible. And I found that, Kyle, when I left the church, and I love that we were similar moments. We're probably at a crossroads. You've got your daughter on your lap. I've got my daughter on my lap. I'm watching the whole women's ordination. I said, I'm out of here. I can't put my name to that anymore, but continued the dialogue outside the church. You were like, I'm going to stay and be part of the conversation in the church. And you've been able to successfully do that. The thread there is that we're both not beholding financially to the church in that regard. So when I left the church, I thought, look, I'd see lots of things that Ellen White added to the Bible, and I thought, what does the Bible actually teach? Let me spend some time just reading the 4 Gospels. People have heard me say this a million times, so I won't labor on it. But I then did read the 4 Gospels over and over and over again for a few years. Not entering into any other really commentary on that. I read lots of other things, of course, but when it came to the Bible, and boy, I must admit that after a couple of years, I felt like I'd been liberated from the lens of Ellen White, and I saw the gospel differently. This is what Jimmy James is kind of saying, but he's being more brash about it.
Yes.
I saw it differently. I saw that with Adventism, it was all linked to 1844, the sanctuary doctrine, the investigative judgment, the Sabbath, all things that aren't the gospel of the Bible. And it really, just kind of liberated me from that. And so when Rochelle said there, it's not obsessed. It's just hard to disentangle.
Yeah.
And the reason I go on about it and bring these shows to air so often and talk about Ellen White, it's not because I'm still resolving in my own mind. I personally already have resolved that. But every year there's new people coming up going, oh, we didn't know that before. The other day I talked about the food for worms vision that Ellen White had, that was predictive and didn't happen. So therefore, is she a false prophet or not? We had that discussion. And so many liberal progressives said, well, we've never even heard of that before. I've mentioned it 50 times on the show over the last 3.5 years.
Yes.
Food for Worms, didn't even know about it. So that's why we keep the conversation going. So you don't just have the one conversation. And in your case, you'll keep the conversation going with the hopeful and your positive take on it, and people can continue the dialogue around all of that. So let's see what more comments are coming in. Boy, I'm way behind. You'll have seen more of the current ones. I might just have to bypass scroll. Boy, I've had it switched off my end.
Oh, have you? Yes.
Yes,
I don't think I
haven't
had that
been
option.
watching,
So
and I'm just now suddenly going, oh wow.
Yeah. Every now and again, my eye glances sideways.
Across, that's why I have to turn it off. All right, I get so absorbed with the sidebar. So look, I'm just going to randomly bring some up. Barry says, Kyle, I believe at Ellen White's time there was a flood of women claiming a host of views, and I guess he may be referring to Mary Baker Eddy, who started Christian Scientists, and she was very influential. Joseph Smith, these people, hugely influential. Does that make their message true?
Look, and I think that's a really interesting question, right? Like, and the way that they look at influence is when did that influence wane, and is it still expanding, and is it still influential today? And by influence, they're not looking at it in a positive, negative light, right? They're just saying influence is influence. Is this person still part of a conversation? And pretty much from a female standpoint, there are very few. There's only maybe 2 other people on that Smithsonian list of 100 most influential Americans of all time. There's only, I believe, 3 women who are on that list.
I think Mary Baker Eddy is on there too.
I think she is, yeah. I think she's one of them, yeah.
She's a founder of Christian Scientists.
Yeah, and I think that in and of itself is worth then delving into. I'm sure somebody will make a film about her at some point, like Oppenheimer's obviously on that list, and Christopher Nolan just made a film about him. People are probably working their way down that Smithsonian list as we speak.
Oh, Hollywood.
Yeah. Because these people are hugely interesting because they have had an influence and an effect on people. And as a filmmaker, I'm not particularly interested on whether that effect was good, bad, or indifferent. As a filmmaker, so set aside Adventist Kyle, as a filmmaker, Kyle is interested in, well, who was this person? So strip away, the things that we know about them. Let's meet an actual person, right? And let's look at that actual person in the light of, they did amazing things, but they also argued with their spouse, and they also neglected their children and had huge amounts and huge bouts of guilt and depression, which she talked openly about as well. I think the fact even that you were saying that the legacy of the conversation around her in Adventism forced you to go and look at what the gospel actually says about itself is a positive thing, which I think you would find Ellen White would probably agree with, because a lot of the things she said was, don't take my word for it, go and look at it yourself, So from a legacy point of view, I think it's fascinating to look at that controversy and conversation around her and the role that she still plays. I think it's really healthy, actually. And the more we talk about that and the more we challenge it, the more people are going to actually go and go, well, you know what? I'm going to do research on my own. And I think the value of that is you stop going, well, so-and-so said, but I've never read it myself. You've actually got to go and do 100%. That work.
Yeah. Oh,
and if you don't do that work, then, that's kind of on you, right?
Exactly,
That's not on the institution. It's not on whatever. It's on you because you didn't
100%. Yeah. If you're playing the victim card, well, you just didn't research for your own mind to decide,
because it's all
young
there.
enough.
It's all there, and there's no age limit to when you can go and do that investigation for yourself. So be careful about using that word investigation, don't you?
I know. Now, just a quick, where's it gone here? I had it. I'm going to read this in a moment that's on there, but where is it? I had it brought up to share, and I don't want to rely on my memory.
Is that the one that you've got up on?
No. It's one I'm going to just talk about. I put that up so it wouldn't go popping out of the screen, which they do. Oh yes, Christopher Mindanao. He recently on a podcast. I'll take this off and bring it back in a second. It's about the thing though. He recently on a podcast said that he believed what the Bible taught, that Sunday is not the mark of the beast, and that the Sabbath is not the seal of God. Now, Adventists teach that Sunday is the mark of the beast and that the seal of God is the Sabbath. The Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible says, and we had Tyler Morgan on the other day who said to everybody watching, what is the seal of God? Now, there was a 3-minute delay in the answer, so we both were thinking, oh, no one knows.
Yeah.
But gradually it all came up. The Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit. The seal of God, as taught by the Bible, is not the Sabbath, it's the Holy Spirit. Now, because you're not on the payroll, you could say to me right now, oh, the seal of God is the Sabbath. That's what I think. Or I think the seal of God is the Holy Spirit. Fine. He lost his job because of that.
Yeah.
Said it on a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the greater thing is I'm just a filmmaker, Peter, right? I'm not a theologian. And, you're having that conversation with me about that right now. And I started glazing over because I'm like, I actually don't know anything. I don't even know what I think about that.
But you are an influential person.
Yes.
And Ellen White was an influential person. Yeah. So you get to a level where, one day you might be in the Smithsonian, influential people.
I like that you've got the...
oh, look at the celebration.
Yeah, look at the celebration.
I don't know what is it. I don't know what I have to do to make that happen. But the point is that at some point you have to realize you're next level influential. And you're in that land now where what you're doing is very influential. And so this is back to you. You can't take on board going, well, I'm going to produce stuff and worry about what people think. We know that. We've established that. That's great. Yeah. But it does mean that, some of these topics are probably worth looking into.
Oh, 100%. And it surprises me every time I do one of these, no matter who I'm talking to. There's certain things that you just go, I have no opinion on this thing that we're talking about right now. And I probably should at some point have an opinion
you'd
on it.
think that the Sunday as the mark of the beast is one of the central themes of the hopeful people.
Yeah, well, you would think that, but no, and again, that to me is not a central core focus of why tell that story, right? That story is why did this particular group of people look at the world and, the human condition of anticipation and disappointment and hope and healing.
Yes, you're telling the human aspect.
You're telling the human aspect of that story as it relates to the faith that they held on to throughout that experience, right? And I think that that's unique in the sense that we haven't done that take before ever. Yeah. We've always told that this happened and that happened and this highlight of history and that
the more theological, political aspect.
And we've forgotten, I think, by and large, that these were just people like us.
Yeah.
Right? Who are trying to deal and wrestle with the big questions in life like we do. They went and they did Bible conferences. We sit around on social media and have them like this, right? Like there's not really any difference. The conversation's the same.
Yeah.
It's a debate about the big things that weigh on us. And I'm always fascinated by what becomes the hot topic of conversation sometimes,
Yeah.
And
I guess for
how
me,
unaware of that I am a lot of the time. I'm like,
I lived most of my life feeling that I could be very flexible within my Adventism. And then now as I'm outside looking in, I look at it and go, okay, well, if the claim is that you are a special movement that came together because of events that happened October 22, 1844, and a visionary messenger prophet had direct communication with God, and she said, this is a very important message to be told to the world. What interests me is that myself, your generation, I can't find an Adventist that's willing to say, well, look, Sunday is the mark of the beast. The Sabbath is the seal of God, and that is a central theme of Adventism, that we are preparing a people who will stand in the last days and prove Satan's claim wrong that the commandments can't be kept. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, if we were just a normal Protestant movement, and we were claiming just the normal Protestant belief, let's get back to the Bible, let's not let the Catholics overtake our ability to connect directly with God and the Bible itself, then all of this would make sense to me. But the Adventists are claiming via direct divine message to Ellen that this is a special, unique time now. 1844 on is now the time where the Lord's coming back any day based on your being ready. They're hopeful that he's coming soon and he's going to take them there. But the central theme is proving Satan wrong, vindicating God. But when I say to Adventists, hey, do you know what the central theme of Adventism actually is? The reason they came into existence? They go, well, that's not my Adventism. Or, yes, that is my Adventism, and you're going to burn longer than the others if you don't agree with it. The people that are the liberal progressives who are not willing to say, yes, that is the original, and then say, and I'm jettisoning that belief because now it's broader. There seems to be, like you say, they're more glazed over. We go, well, I don't really know. What's Ted talking about? That's not my
I'll give you my opinion of why.
It's not a unique Protestant view. It's a unique end-time doctrine that they're teaching.
I'll give you my view of when I did the research in this area, the thing that stands out to me that is uniquely Adventist about Adventism's, like what the contribution of Adventism is to the broader discussion of Christianity is actually on the character of Christ, right? Like when you have a look at where it sprang out of and why Miller started looking at it and got excited about prophecy.
The nature of Christ or the character of Christ?
The character of Christ, right? He saw the healing side of that character and he went, that is something that I can gravitate towards and that I want. When he spoke for the first time and when Ellen heard him, the thing that she gravitated to, because she needed healing, remember? She heard him for the first time in a moment in her life when healing was really forefront and foremost. The healing aspect of Christ's character that Miller was highlighting was in stark contrast to the judgmental, wrath, vengeful God who was, you put a step out of line, he's going to cut you off, And so when I look at the originating purpose of why Miller felt that he had to get out there and talk, it was not a fear factor for him. He wasn't like, the end is nigh, be afraid. He was like, actually, this is the character of Christ that I met, and then I discovered that he's coming back. But don't focus on that, and it's not until he gets kind of swept up in the need for marketing, right? Which is
that with the guy Snow comes along, he's the carny.
Like those things are normal responses, right? Like people want a date, they want certainty, they want this, that, and the other. And slowly but surely, the focus of that character of Christ, which was the appealing instigator of his message in the first place, kind of gets lost a little bit in the clutter of, like, it's going to be this date, it's going to be that date, all the other stuff that comes in on there. But if you had to say to me, what is the uniqueness of Adventism? I would say it is on our understanding of the character of Christ is hopeful and healing. That is it. And when you have a look at what our name is, it's pretty self-evident that hope and healing is actually encapsulated in the name Seventh-day Adventist. We have a hope in a second coming of healing that is going to come with that. I think if we
also in that name, you can say seventh day, keep the Sabbath or you won't go to heaven. And if you do, you'll hasten the return of the Advent.
You could look at it that way, or
that's how it was taught.
That's how it was taught. But again, if you look at the healing value of a 24-hour period of time where you get to pull out of responsibility and guilt of the day-to-day grind of the rest of the week, when people that worked on The Hopeful with
But
me
that's
asked
not
me
how
to,
Adventism was taught or given to Vision to Ellen, though. That's not how.
and
it was
that's
taught.
100% fine, right?
The
That's
unique
100%
element
fine.
wasn't how liberal Adventists portray it now. The liberal element up till the day Ellen White died was, this is circled. This is a test. There's going to come a time when you have to keep it to get to heaven.
Yeah.
So I'm not challenging that you've got a different view. I had that different
But I'm
view.
also not saying that that's not a thing that sits there in Adventism. I'm saying that as for Kyle personally, the thing that I've seen that resonates with people when they ask you about it, not when I tell them, because I'm not the guy going out there and telling people about my Adventism. I've just had the opportunity to work on something that's meant people have asked me, well, why do you do Sabbath? Right? Because we're working on this film and we need to get some sort of an understanding of why you do what you do. For me, I look at it and I go, well, that simpleness is more valuable to me than arguing the relevancy of what the intent was, right? Regardless of what the intent was, the way that Kyle, as an individual, must relate to it in his daily life is not going to be the same way that you do or somebody else does.
And I am pleased, very pleased, that you can land on that view, and that most liberal progressives who watch this show and
I love that
feel
somebody just said, we pray that you be liberated from Adventism. It's like, why? Like, why do I need to be, right? Like, it's just as valid for me to be okay with being Adventist as it is for that person to be okay with not being. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is to, like on both sides of that equation, you've got people that desperately want to see somebody see their point of view and agree with them. And dare I challenge like us that that's not the point of relationship with people. It's not that we all suddenly go, yes, you're right, and I will change fundamentally my life as a result of it. But also, I'm not going to throw out the relationship with people. I've got more friends of mine, Peter, and you will probably find this as well. I have more atheists in my life than I have Christians these days. Has it meant that I've suddenly become atheist? No, not at all. Will I ever become atheist as a result of that? Unlikely, right? Because that's, my basis for life isn't dependent on the whims of the people who are around me. Do they affect me in positive ways? 100%. Atheists are some of the most fascinating people because they're challenged to you about, well, do you do that because you fear judgment, or do you do that because it's the right thing to do? Great question, right?
Yeah.
And we should be challenged by that question.
I think, like I was saying, I'm totally fine with people saying that's not my Adventism, this is my Adventism, and this is what I take from it. The thing that I'm trying to tease out from people very unsuccessfully, and Brian S. Newman, in an interview I did with him, and I typed it into the
that's a great question. And of course, we're not originally who we claim to be,
and
right?
That's right. And he said that Adventists that are the liberal progressives that want to work within the Ted Wilson more conservative framework need to admit that we aren't originally who we claim to be, not just your normal sociological changes, but Frank Merendino added at a different time, you have to jettison those. The progressive liberal is not willing to publicly jettison those quite dangerous mark of the beast, seal of God statements. I doubt that you would say that Adventism's the sole purpose to vindicate God, but that's what you're going to find from Ted Wilson's theology, and I view his theology as more accurate to being the core heritage Adventism. So I just want liberal progressives to say, yeah, I don't believe that. That's not my Adventism, and I have jettisoned those teachings, but they won't go that far. Now, I don't care if they do or they don't. But it just interests me that they won't.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It interests me that people need to know where you stand on something, right? Like that interests me.
Because it can be very harmful. That's the problem.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting. Somebody just made a comment about Adventism hasn't affected Kyle. I'm like, wow, like if only you knew, right? Like it's funny that we go, because you have a philosophy and a way of speaking in the moment that we've met you, that we can extrapolate out that means this instead, like it's interesting to me that people would take that comment as meaning that then it hasn't affected me negatively and stopped me living my livelihood. He's lucky. You're like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
That's like saying that living life in any context as a human hasn't affected you and your livelihood. And, like, welcome to being alive. Like life is not a, it's not without its effect. And I think that just because you look at the positivity of that effect, like the failures that I've experienced being an Adventist, man alive, like massive amounts of failures. But I look at those through a positive lens because I look at where they've led and the opportunities that those failures have opened up. And I go, well, isn't that, I can be grateful for the fact that there have been situations that have sucked, like, right, and have not been pleasant and have like led to the, I don't work for the church anymore. That should tell you something about, I am not gainfully employed on the payroll, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting, that's an interesting thing, So I think that we've got to be a lot more, you and I had a conversation earlier about the black and white nature of opinion, right? Like if we live in a black and white world where it's this and that, and there's no possibility for anything in between, we lose, I think, a little bit of our humanity and our ability to relate to other people, because it blocks the possibility of any other answer other than the one that I agree with or the one that I don't agree with, and I think it's really important to not be so, I don't know, structured that you can't possibly think that there's anything outside of the way I think right now.
Exactly. And people are also on different journeys. Like I had people saying to me for 25 years, some of the things that are being said in the comments here, for me to then piously say to someone else, oh, why aren't you looking at it the way I have?
Yes.
You've got to be patient, or you've got to realize that people are using their own brain to think about things.
Well, and also people use the comment of others to kind of test and prod how they feel about something themselves, right? Like it's why we go to cinema, because, we go, I'll give you a great example, right? Like I walked out of Oppenheimer last year thinking very differently about my relationship to making big life-changing decisions that seem really good on the surface, right? So, you take his drive to make an atom bomb before somebody else that could potentially do something far more dangerous with it got there. So like it became about the greater good for humanity is that the good guys make the bomb first. And then there's that horrible moment of realization after the bomb gets dropped, and there's all of that news coming in, and you've got this massive close-up. I was lucky enough to see it in IMAX in Nashville, and it's huge. There's just his frame and the background's vibrating, and you suddenly realize that he's just understood that he became the monster, right? The thing that he was doing to prevent the monster escaping actually helped it get out in the first place. And I love that about cinema. Because what it says to you, the challenge of that is like, I'm not going to be creating an A-bomb anytime soon, but in my context, I might, right? Yeah. And there's plenty of times when we think that the thing that we're doing is saving us from the monster, but then we realize that it was us all along, right? Like, I think that's great. We'd all like to think we're the hero in our own story. I'll tell you who I relate to the most in The Hopeful. And she's probably the most unique in that film for it, is Ellen's sister Elizabeth, who's so skeptical and basically like just does not buy any of it and chucks
Ellen's twin sister, did you say?
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating character.
Fabulous character.
You portrayed her
Yeah.
perfectly. I remember watching that and thinking,
Well, you wait till you see her. She's very, very different in the
I can't wait. Hopefully you haven't lost that sense of, I loved how she was indifferent to Ellen.
Yes.
In the way it probably actually was.
Well, I don't know, because everything I've read about her attitude towards her sister actually informed me in the hopeful to supercharge that, right? Is to dial that. You know, I'll give you a great example. There's a scene with her and Ellen on the back of the ox cart, which is in both films, is in both, you know,
I love that
and the hopeful. So in Tell the World, that was ADR'd because they felt that her emotion and her vocal was too much.
Oh.
Right? And I just reverted it back. I used a very different performance of that, where she's very forceful and very emotionally charged.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Because that's people, right? Like that's how we respond to things. Like when we vehemently see something that we disagree with, sometimes we don't have enough time to stop ourselves and compose ourselves and get the right answer.
I guess
react.
What I loved about her character, it's just hit me, is that you didn't demonize her for not agreeing with Ellen.
Yes.
And I felt that people watching this have total permission to be Ellen's sister if they want to be.
Somebody just made a point about don't demonize people on the payroll either, because they've got to be compensated.
And we talked about that earlier. They may have just
talked about that earlier.
We're definitely not doing that. We in fact said we understand why.
And I think you should too, like, because honestly, like, just because you're on the payroll doesn't mean that you don't actually like in your core fiber believe that and are passionate about that as well. And I don't think that we should look at someone who's quote unquote towing the party line as actually even doing that. You know, I think sometimes we misconstrue, you know, for certain people, myself included, like you can get really passionate about something and go, right, well, I need to craft this in a way that I feel I can defend. So therefore I've got to write it down and I've got to do it like this because I don't want to be taken out of context. If I am taken out of context, that's going to be, you know, detrimental. And so, yeah, I 100% don't discredit someone that is trying to navigate that in a way that they feel like they're not going to get misconstrued. Because that's a real fear that people have, I think, you know. And just because I don't care anymore, right? Like I'm quite happy for somebody to call me up tomorrow and be like, "Oh, I can't believe you said that about that." Like, really? Like, I mean, probably. I'd have to look back at it myself, which I'm not going to do.
Exactly. It's a new day.
My AirPods, so I'm going to go on to
normal.
Normal.
It's funny. Something went weird with mine just in a minute too.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now, because I love these long play interviews, and I encourage people say, "Oh, do shorter interviews." No, I just do the long play. However long we go is how we go. And if you watch for 3 seconds, great. I often recommend people just scroll along afterwards. Watch for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you're wired to watch, whatever your brain wires you to watch, and you will get something from it. You don't have to watch the whole thing, everybody. But I'm doing the long play.
Do you have the subtitles come up, like it tells you the transcript of it? Because I'll sometimes do that on podcasts too.
You can on YouTube after the event.
Yeah, like I'll do a keyword search and I'll go, "Oh, did they talk about blah blah blah?" And then you can see and just watch that section.
It's been good that they've had that there because
Really
it helps with keywords. That's been better than tagging. So what we're going to do before we wrap things up is I'm going to do some fast little bring them comments up, and we might take them as comments rather than responding. I think we've covered almost every possible ground, and those that are watching that think we haven't, go back and you'll find it. It's there. But let's just bring up some random quick ones. A quick reminder to those watching on Facebook. I love that you're watching over there. I can't bring your comments onto the screen though, so you'll need to go to the page, and you can write from there and they'll come on. So let's just bring a couple of quick ones on, and if you feel the need to comment, you can, Kyle. Otherwise, we'll just bring them on and we'll say that they're just statements or comments.
Yes.
Schley, amen. That's exactly right, Kyle. It's all about relationships, theosis.
I mean, maybe. Like, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And sometimes you can have the relationships that bring people into, like, I'd be wary bringing people into Adventism because there's a 90% chance they're going to stumble across the great controversy and take it literally. Tim Humphreys is watching. Now, Tim, you've written scripts. I don't know if you know that. Maybe you guys should talk to each other. Do you know Tim?
I think Tim and I are connected.
Yeah, Tim has got a great script that he sent me to read, and I'm going to be reading it next week. So I'm looking forward to that, Tim. Listening to you and the soundtrack on Spotify at the same time. Great production value. And
that's where you stream music.
Andy has said, I've tried PayPal, but it didn't work. I'll just bring this up because a few people have said that. Those watching, is it possible, you don't have to make a donation, but can you go and test both of those links for me? I've just added a second one that might be more accurate. Maybe I've been giving the wrong one, and that's why I've had no donations for a couple of weeks. So
I've been noticing that my bank account's been ticking up.
So you're hopefully getting some donations. So maybe they've gone to you instead. So if people don't mind, just quickly test that for me. That would be brilliant. For me, they both work. But
as long as Peter, your bank account hasn't been going down as a result of
as people are taking it out instead of
taking out, you've sent it the wrong direction.
Andy adds she knows more about Ellen and Adventism since leaving. Sheridan writes, and how are you, Sheridan? Sheridan's one of the unscripted guys that's been on the show. I'm very keen to get those who are employed by the church to come on unscripted. That's the difficulty, that one. He mentions that I'm not right. The Sabbath is the logical conclusion of the Spirit at work, I think he's meaning. Yeah, but the Bible doesn't say about ultimate conclusions. The Bible says the seal is the Holy Spirit. He doesn't then say, therefore, this, and that. But anyway, I appreciate your thoughts. Sorry, they had Ellen confirm everything. That's true.
That is true. They definitely, touch pointed most of their study of Scripture on that. And in fact, one of my favorite moments in the film is the argument around that, right? Because James really nails her at one stage about that, and it's when that. I think it's a fascinating insight into that relationship. When you look at, it's fascinating because I've had lots of Adventist scholars tell me that they weren't in love, and I would dispute that just as much as I would dispute that they had like plenty of times where they probably weren't as well, And there's some stuff where she wrote to a friend and afterwards told the friend to destroy the letters, and then the letters showed up in the 1960s.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which are a great insight, actually. And I'm glad that they exist because what it shows you is that this person is human like everybody else, and understanding that someone is a person and not just the myth that we've created of them, I think allows you to look at them in a very different way when you re-engage. And again, that's not to say that you should re-engage to buy into it. I think you should re-engage just because this is someone for whom a lot of people reference. And if you don't know what that reference is, how can you, if you get in a conversation about it, you're either going to have to go and do it, or you're just going to disconnect from that conversation. So I think it's valuable to just look at these people in a more human light, because they are human, right? And I think that's valuable to remember that.
I think I'm able to look at people like, say, C.S. Lewis or Martin Luther, even Martin Luther King Jr. in the light of flawed humanity. What I struggle with, though, is Ellen White's claim that these messages were direct from God, and then when you find some of them didn't happen or untrue or unbiblical, I don't care how flawed she was, and I accept her 100%, but I don't accept the claim that was from God.
And that's wonderfully complicated, and that again is another reason why there's a film where she's a central character, because that is interesting, right? And that conversation is interesting, and that's something I think that we need to individually and collectively talk about. That is a conversation that should be had,
exactly.
Because it's not just us talking about it, right? I listened to a podcast, big evangelical podcast, got like 3 million odd listeners. And they were discussing that, not in reference to the film. This just was a topic of conversation. Someone had called in and had a comment about, what about those Adventists? And then they ended up having probably a 4-hour podcast like this, just unpacking that,
Yeah.
I think it's valuable because we're not the only ones talking about it.
It stimulates more conversation. It's out there. What you've said, what I've just said, people can now decide. Ray has decided. He has said more accepting what? The body of Christ rejects the mongrel dog Adventist demonic cult that proclaims Sunday keepers, asinine phrase, are worse than heathens. You are disgusting. He's not meaning you. He's meaning those.
He's meaning collective.
Collective and those who make those claims.
Strong words, Ray. Strong words.
And Adventists do not believe the gospel.
Well, again, my challenge to that would be, okay, but what Adventists and who are they? And, be specific. Like, it's easy to throw out a broad catch-all phrase, and anyone.
Well, it's hard. And Ray's followed the journey of me trying to get Adventists that are on the payroll to actually come on and say what Adventism is. They just don't seem comfortable doing that.
Well, do you think that part of that's probably because most of us don't 100% know what it is, right?
Yeah.
Historically, because we don't know our history to the extent.
Well, they know what Ted says, and they just say, I don't believe it. And you're right, they don't know the history. That's why I love this movie, because it's already generating this kind of conversation.
I've learned stuff today about our history. There's a few things that we've talked about or I've not, I don't actually know anything about that.
Yeah.
I may go and do a little bit more looking at that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I can't take my eyes off it because it's so fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, again, for good, bad, or indifferent, these people have got a big influence globally, right? Like we are disproportionately influential in the health space. Adventism runs the largest Protestant healthcare network on the planet. On the planet, right? So say what you like about us, but we got a lot of hospitals, and therefore we've got a lot of influence. So maybe we should think about that conversation a little bit more broadly. Right?
Yeah, you wouldn't want to undermine that, but you also wouldn't want to use that as a confirmation that it's true.
Yeah, right. Like, but you do need to talk about, like, where did this impetus, like, why are there so many hospitals? Why are Adventists so focused on this healing aspect? Really valid. Somebody said, one of my favorite, actually, my wife came in during the break, and I was like, I know a couple of people at ADRA, and I was like, I should tell them apparently that we're on to them, that they are actually the CIA.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll let them know. They'll need to change their what they're doing, because the jig's up.
They're CIA Masonic Jesuits. Now Sheridan writes, LGT, Peter, that's LGT. That's pre-Des, but Andreessen was years after Ellen White died. I'm not sure what you mean there, Sheridan. You're welcome to add.
That probably meant as much to me as it meant when I was talking about an Arri Alexa with the M+ badge on it.
Oh, right.
You've got to know, right?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. And Sheridan's saying, paint everyone with the same brush. That doesn't reflect the Adventism I know. And Sheridan, you've missed my point. I am not painting everyone with the same brush. I know that every single Adventist watching has got a different view of what Adventism is. My point is, collectively, does it have a unique message? And its claim is that it does. And I'm saying, well, what is that message? So believe what you want. I'm not painting anyone with a brush. I'm just simply saying, will the real Adventist stand up? Not individuals. The person that can say, this is what we believe, this is what's distinctive, There is no one saying the distinctive message other than Ted, and then people will say, oh, that's not my Adventism. Fine, I get it. But what's the mission statement? And I think it's pretty clear what it is, and that most liberal progressives don't believe it. And that's fine. Awesome. Jimmy James writes, super interested to me that Adventists are so biblically illiterate.
Well, actually, I think the interesting comment someone just brought up, Catholics have over 5,000, but they're classed as the Catholic hospital system, not Protestant. Adventists have 500-ish plus globally.
And then you've got heaps of Mormon institutions as well, but they're another whole thing.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this one before, Sheridan, said those Adventists in payroll shouldn't be discredited. Again, Sheridan, yeah, we're not saying that. Oh, okay. So I'm now getting a Bible study. Ezekiel, Peter regarding seal and the Sabbath. I'm saying that the Bible in the Gospels, the New Covenant, does not say that the seal, of course it was in the Old Testament. The seal had a totally different meaning in the Old Covenant to the New. Christ came not to do away with the law, but to fulfill it and to give it a new perspective. You are no longer bound by that seal. The seal is now the Holy Spirit. But thank you for that Bible study. We should get you on again, Sheridan. We can dig into that one. I'd love it. And that was the Adventist one. And there's a bunch of comments over here on Facebook I just can't bring in. Mate, we have done something today that is, I think, really important.
We've done it for 3.5 hours.
I can't believe it. It's awesome. And it feels like 5 minutes. Blake, lucky you weren't here. We would have gone another 2 hours.
He'd have bailed out by now. I'd be like, I just like tinkle on my keyboard with music. There's been quite a few moments actually on this where I've just like, I am unqualified for this conversation.
We all are. We all are unqualified, and I like that. We're all, just giving it a go, trying our best, loving our kids.
I think if we're unwilling to talk about things, even if aspects of them we don't know enough about, right? Like I think we're never going to have the conversations that need to be had. We won't get there.
Exactly.
And if we're not challenged in that to realize, there's a bit more to know here, I might need to go off
and, the greatest gratitude I have is to the people, for me personally, is to the people like Ray, who put the torch, the heat to my feet and made me go, can I defend this? Let me look at it a bit deeper.
Yes.
And then I used my brain and I drew my own conclusions and I left.
Yeah.
I know you, and I know the kind of work and the whole sphere of your profession is full on putting the torch to your feet all the time. So I know that you've had to look at things and draw your own conclusions. And so you've landed in a different place to me. But you and I are still going, hey, boy, I've learned something today, or I didn't know that, or good on you, Sheridan, for talking about the old covenant there. And we're just getting a chance to have this conversation. Everyone that has commented today, I totally value your contribution. Thank you very much. So we look at this group, the hopeful, this group of people that came about October 22, 1844. For you personally, as you've seen this valuable story, you've made a life being an Adventist. It's part of your DNA almost. You're a cultural Adventist, but you also have the aspects of the theology and the ideology at play as well. But do you personally think something supernatural happened that night, October 22? Or do you think, like Norm Young, that it's more of a providential? And I love that within the Adventist Church, we had Bill Johnson, when I asked him that question, pause for 30 seconds and say, I can't really answer that. Others have said immediately, yes, of course something supernatural happened that night. And others, like Norm Young, so I'm demonstrating to everybody, these are three people that are Adventists and had three massively different views. Some could answer it immediately. Some could say, no, I can't answer that. And people like Norm Young said, well, I don't think anything supernatural happened, but it providentially did. So just out of interest, your own personal belief. Did something supernatural happen that night, October 22?
I guess it depends on what your definition of supernatural is, right? Like, if you've got as many people as at, by estimates,
Christ beginning a new phase of ministry.
Well, who knows? So that side of it, I wouldn't comment on as like what I agree, because I simply don't know enough theologically about it, right? To go, I'm going to hang my hat on that. But what I will say is, if you've got the amount of people who are all looking at something and going, yes, then I would say that something supernatural happened, because you can't get a collective group of people to do it's like people are herding cats, Peter, right? So to get them to all pull in the direction of this is legit and it's happening at the same time, that's to me the definition of supernatural, because the natural order of things would say nobody would like get on board anything that they can't see and feel and touch and taste, right? If I can't see it and it's not tangible, it's not going to happen and it doesn't exist. So by some estimates, and this is, there's no definitive number on it, in the US at this period of time, there's 17 million people in the greater United States in 1844, give or take a couple of people. There's a couple 100,000 people who are legitimately standing out on a rooftop or in a field or wherever or not they decided to be in that moment, right? Going, something supernatural is going to happen. So to me, I go, something supernatural did happen, because for that amount of people to get together and go, something's going to happen, is a pretty big deal. And then it's worth talking about, right? And it's worth looking at, and it's worth discussing. And, here we are.
But why follow that and not go the way William Miller himself did?
Yeah. Who knows, right? Miller.
Are we only following because our ancestors did and we were born into it?
Maybe,
what's that saying? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. Like for me, that wouldn't be why I look at that as being an event of significance, right? I'd look at that and I'd go, well, again, if you're asking me personally, the things that I view as being good aspects of our particular brand of Christianity that is Adventism, right? The focus on Christ as hope and healing. I look at the outworking of those and I go, okay, there's a lot of good positive aspects to that. You can read down any comment on any thread talking about Adventism and see the negative aspects of that as well, right? There's a lot of people for whom that movement isn't positive, And I think you'd be disingenuous to discredit their experience in that as well.
But I guess if you are wanting to, if you see value in your movement or denomination, Schlee's been a bit hard here, but he's saying what a terrible argument. By that logic, Muhammad really did get visited by the angel Gabriel and was given the Quran. If your argument is,
I wasn't there, and neither were you. So I mean, just because you don't buy into that and neither do I, right, doesn't mean you're right. And it doesn't.
No, but if your argument is that because it was a lot of people involved and they thought something special happened, I might believe that too. That's your personal decision. But if you're wanting to bring people into the fold, how can you more convincingly? How can you more convincingly tell them that this is a special movement?
Well, I guess that's a question for someone that wants to do that, right? Like if your motivation and purpose as an Adventist is to bring them into Adventism, right, then that's a question for you personally. Some people would argue that should be all of our motivation, and maybe it should. I don't know, Is it my motivation in life to bring people into Adventism? No. My motivation in life is to connect better with God and therefore connect better with other people through that connection. That's my motivation in life. I do that through the lens of cultural Adventism as an adult in 2024, right? And you can disagree with me doing that. That's what I'm doing. Tough luck. That's what I've chosen to do. So you can disagree with that, you can not agree with it, whatever, right? But that's what I've chosen to do.
Yeah. I think Nathan, who's just released a new book, I'll give a quick plug.
Nathan Brown.
If Nathan's watching, Nathan Brown, he's going to come on the show and we'll chat about this.
Far more learned man than I, Peter. You'll get far more.
He wrote a book about why I choose to be an Adventist, and I used to think that too, but I've changed my thoughts on that.
How dare you change your thoughts, Peter?
Yes, how dare I? How dare I leave the church? Now, where is this link again? I want to just bring it up and just send people to the hopeful. Let's see if I've got the right buttons pushed. Is that?
Oh, we've certainly pushed some buttons. I think you can.
We have pushed some.
There's certainly been some buttons that have got pushed.
I love it. Mate, I thank you so much for your creative output. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being unscripted. Thank you for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me being unscripted. Oh, sorry, I should put that script down.
I've literally had 2 people on the program. I don't know if anyone knew, but the only way I could get them on was if it was completely scripted. They wrote my questions and then they just answered them, and it was hilarious. At one point, I asked the question, and it was hard to. I think I did a great job of acting. No one could tell I was actually.
I mean,
this is on this show.
You can
it's something I'm so
to do that, right? Though, because it is a bit daunting if you've never done unscripted, just stream of consciousness before. I think there's the fear of that this will be used against you in the future, which it probably will. But there's people have used worse, so that's fine.
Oh, look, I'm sure there's all sorts of good reasons there. But it was funny, as I read one of his questions, he went, "Yes, very good question."
Very good question. I wrote you. Yeah.
He just read his answers.
I always worry that I'm going to come off sounding unintelligent, and then I look back at stuff from time to time and I go, "Oh, well, I mean, you are going to come off sounding unintelligent, so that's fine. Stop worrying about it." Every possible thing that can be thought about you and me
already been thought. Has already been thought, is going to be thought, is being thought. And that was another tip, Clancy, that I found on the journey to feeling very happy in life. I go to sleep happy every night, and I know all the possible thoughts that could be out there and are out there, and it's okay. I don't mind. It's not that I go, "Oh, whatever." It's just like there's nothing. I don't want to be in control of what people think.
I think it's the mark of being an adult, isn't it? When you can go, there are people out there that don't like me. And that's okay. That means that, at least I've done something and tried things,
Yeah.
As devastating as that may be, but all good.
Well, look, Kyle, hang on. No, Andy has said, "Thanks, Kyle, Peter, chat.
You're most welcome.
Lovely flowers."
And by the way, everyone that's been here commenting and being part of the conversation, thank you very much for being a part of it. Otherwise, it's just Peter and I having a chat. We could have probably done this over coffee in Kirrambong. So.
Which we must do because we don't live far from each other. You, me, and Blake are like a stone's throw.
I know, and we must do it.
And look, quick plug for tomorrow. Mike Colburn is back. Same time. Remember, Australia. It's New South Wales. I can't even work out the other time zones, but New South Wales 12:30, no longer 11:30, thanks to daylight saving. But USA, you're staying the same. We're not changing for you guys. You're our biggest audience, ironically. So
you're in Florida, in the eye of Milton.
Oh my
Be safe.
Be safe. Is that Central Time? That's
No, it's Eastern.
It's Eastern Time, right?
I was just in Orlando, right in the middle. I basically picked the eye in between 2 storms, so I
flew out.
Flew out before Milton hit,
because you're only back on Monday, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty devastating.
Very, very sad.
If you're in Florida, guys, and you can leave, go somewhere else.
Yeah, we actually have viewers from Florida. I wasn't even noticing if they were watching today. We'll reach out anyway. But Mike Colburn tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, 12:30 lunchtime here in Australia. I don't know what's happening in West Australia, New Zealand. You'll have to work that out yourselves, everybody. And then on our Friday and Pacific time Thursday night, Frank Merendino's back. We've got our weekly gospel programs, and Frank has been called back by popular demand. So that's him on then. Now, next week may or may not happen. I know a couple of days I'll be away. I'll be at a festival, and I may need to pack and get ready. So it may be a hiatus next week, which go back and watch some of these other short interviews that we've got. And what Schley said, what? You don't want to bring people to the remnant? That was to what you just said.
I would love to bring them to a
delayed
screening of The Revenant, but it's no longer in cinemas, sadly. So.
Wasn't that a powerful opening scene? Was it the opening scene? Wherever he's getting chased down through the water, and
and
oh
that one take.
And then the bear or something around that.
So good. Yeah. I just got a text message from Blake going, I was sleeping and missed everything. What did I miss? Like, it's still going, Blake.
Tell him it's still going. Hopefully he can join later. But yeah, Blake Robinson, go and check out the incredible soundtrack. Go and watch the movie, October 17 in Australia. Go and watch it online in America. I'll be there next week. Wherever I am, I will be watching it. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice.
And Schley got your joke there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Schley. Well, until next time, my friend, and thank you again, everyone, for watching. Hopefully see some of you for one day next week. If not, we'll see you the week after with more. Kyle Portbury, till next time, live long.
Thank you.
And prosper.
Stay hopeful.
Stay hopeful. Love it.
Stay hopeful. Nice.